Murder in the Sunshine State, a Clint McCord trucking adventure, by Tom McLeod. Copyright 1994. This recording of Murder in the Sunshine State was published in 1994 by Spellbinders, which holds the copyright thereto. Neither this recording nor any part thereof may be reproduced nor used for any purpose without prior written authority from Spellbinders. Prologue. Jeff McCord stepped out of the men's room in the highway rest stop. His eyes slowly focused on a shotgun barrel aimed right between his eyes. The spotlight beam from a 4-cell light almost blinded him. The hole in that damn 12-gauge looked 2 feet wide. "Hey!" he shouted. "What the hell's going on?" "Florida State Police, turn around, put your hands on top of your head, and spread your legs. Now!" the voice behind the spotlight barked. "Well, turn off that damn light, you son of a bitch, or I'll reach over that thing and stuff it down your neck." "Jeff," the cool voice of his brother Clint urged him, "just relax. Everything will be fine just as soon as you steady down." "Well, what's going on, Clint? Where are you?" Jeff felt his hands grabbed and shackled behind his back. Roughly, he was twisted back around. "Clint!" The light was turned off, and for the first time Jeff could survey the scene. He saw Clint, with his hands behind him, and cops everywhere. It was not a happy sight. Chapter 1. 40-year-old Clint and his younger brother Jeff were raised on a hard-scrabble Texas Panhandle oleo ranch, a cheap spread outside Amarillo. Dad McCord was a bull hauler who had pushed his revered Peterbilt for as long as anyone could remember. A tough old bird, Dad McCord loved his 2 sons and had them riding lumper as soon as they were old enough. Whether they worked the ranch or rode with their dad, 2 things never changed. They were either knee-deep in debt or in cow shit. Usually both. Then Texaco's geologists punched enough test holes on their land to convince Dad he would rather be a gentleman rancher than slug it out on land and highway. But he missed it. Oh, how he missed that smelly old truck, the diesel fumes, the hum of recaps singing against the pavement. And so did the boys. College seemed the natural choice for the sons of Alex McCord, who had the funds to send them. Clint finished with a business degree from West Texas State at Canyon, Texas, south of Amarillo. Not too far from home, he figured. But his country needed him, and he ended up a long way from home in Vietnam. The Rangers seemed a good choice, and his bright new lieutenant's bars got a little dirty in his 2 tours in Nam. Little brother Jeff followed right along in his brother's steps, like a puppy nosing after his mother. Computers fascinated him, so West Texas gave him a degree for 4 years of parties, girls, and booze. When Clint came home, it was Jeff who restored a sense of balance to Clint's life, and the ranch that once again pulled him into the land. But both men felt a pull to see more than Amarillo. "How can you sit here on the ranch after all you've seen? Clint, I would think you'd be as antsy as Pa when he hears a big truck haul by." "I am, Jeff." He paused to enjoy the last rays of the sun as it painted scarlet strokes against a darkening sky. "I've been thinking about moving on. Being a coupon clipper doesn't appeal to me like I thought it would." Clint looked out across the land at the big black birds sucking up oil out of the McCord ranch. "Those damn things always look like the little birds that sit on the side of a water glass, up and down till they nose in. Futility." "I've got the road fever too, Clint. Dad's content, even though all he talks about is that truck that's like a shrine in the backyard. Dumb old thing, cantankerous engine, a ride like sitting on a concrete horse, and a cab so hot you had to feed the chickens ice to keep 'em from shitting hard-boiled eggs." "Yeah, he loved that old truck. But I think I'd like to roam a while, see some of the country, but keep working. We still have our CDLs. How about we look at a couple of new Petes and go moseying?" "Damn, why didn't I think of that? Sounds great to me." I've been following you since I was a little guy, like a doggy searching for his ma. No reason to stop now. Let's do it." He stopped in the middle of his outburst, which had propelled him across the porch. "Hey, big brother, what about Dad? Will he be okay here without us?" Clint's face was pierced with a slow, full grin. "See, I was thinking Pop could maintain a headquarters here for us, keep up on the latest equipment, let us know anything important that was going on, sort of be our command post. You think he'll go for it?" He said he would." And Clint put up his arms to defend against the oncoming brother, who came at him with a whoop and a crushing wrestling takedown. "Steady, little brother. Let's finish our beers and go by that Peterbilt dealer out on I-40. They took the last pulls on their Lone Star bottles and headed for Amarillo. As both men knew, the new trucks were as different from their dads as a semaphore is from a fax. But knowing it is different from experiencing it. They were astonished at the options offered them for their rigs. Clint and Jeff wanted separate trucks for lots of reasons, but the main one was a desire to see and do it all on their own. Together when they chose, apart when they cared to be. The biggest option that they both went for, in addition to phone and fax, was the satellite hookup, an electronically controlled engine functioning monitor that, through a computer, analyzed the complete operation of engine, axles, transmission, and running gears. If a problem showed on the computer, the operator of the console at the home station could reach them by fax and offer alternatives. This is where Dad came in. If the repair could not be fixed on the spot, Dad could set up a repair depot appointment or order parts, whatever. "Jeff, here's where Dad really fits in. This'll keep him in touch with us." "Yeah, but we need a broker. We can't rely on Dad to get our loads and figure commissions." They had spent enough time around trucks in the past weeks to learn that trucking is a big-time business. It was important to run with full loads all the time to make money, and the broker could do just that. Their first haul was really cross-country, Los Angeles to Tampa, Florida, and they hoped this would be their only bobtail run, Amarillo to Los Angeles. They were to pick up 2 loads of exotic marine engines for a boat manufacturer who produced offshore racers. Each engine was worth in excess of $20,000. They signed their copies of the bills of lading, called the insurance company, and registered the proper amount of information to protect themselves, headed for the nearest commercial scale to reaffirm the weight, and headed out of the Los Angeles dock area for Florida. 3,000 miles of highway, freedom, and God's country. Chapter 2. The air at the Florida rest stop was as soft and fragrant as cotton scented with night-blooming jasmine, and Clint and Jeff McCord felt a kind of dislocation as they twisted their hands in the cuffs while being scrutinized by the highway patrolman. Neither of the men had any idea why they'd been singled out, and they were aware of the fearful glances of tourists coming out of and going into the oasis. "Okay, you 2 road bums, we're heading for the magistrate to get you booked." "Booked?" asked Clint. "For what?" "We have 2 dead German tourists, a 3rd passenger in a hospital bed, and a positive ID on his lips. I think they will bring down an indictment of first-degree murder without a whisper." "Are you nuts?" screamed Jeff. "Us? Murderers? You gotta be kidding. We just drove in from the West Coast, stopped here for a couple of hours' rest, and we're headed into Tampa. What makes you think we're the people you're looking for?" "Look, you smart-ass punk, you come along quietly and nicely, or I personally will show you who we think you are." "Jeff, shut up. You'll only bring us more problems. They're wrong, and with some discussion and the proper people, we'll be out of here." "What about our rigs? If we leave 'em here, we'll never see 'em again." He pointed over to their trucks, which were idling in the trucker's lot by the rest stop. Nodding agreement, Clint asked, "Is there some way we can bring our rigs along?" "Okay, we'll put an armed officer in each cab with you and a marked car behind, but let me warn you, no funny moves, no misturns, no nothing." "You got it," replied Clint. 2 Smokies cradled their shotguns as they walked the suspects to their vehicles. Clint clambered aboard the cab and opened the door for his new partner, watching as Jeff got into his. As they pulled out of the rest stop, Clint asked, "What made you believe that there was 2 of us? Why didn't you just grab one?" "The rigs were a matched pair. Lots of drivers run tandem today." All went as the officer predicted, and they wound up at the state police barracks about 6 miles distant. Clint put his rig where directed, locked it securely, and set the alarm system. Jeff was alongside doing the same. As it was warm, they did not need to leave the engine idling. "Thank the good Lord we're not in Minnesota. We would have more problems," said Jeff as they were escorted into the barracks. Clint and Jeff were brought into an interrogation room and left. It was almost 2 hours later that a youngish man, well-dressed, came into the room. "I'm State's Attorney Wilford Banks," he said as he put his briefcase on the table. They watched him remove a yellow legal pad and a voice-activated tape recorder. "I'm sure you have many questions, but before we start, would you mind if we tape this session?" Clint nodded a yes, but the lawyer asked him to answer orally, as everything they would talk about could be used in their trial. Clint and Jeff answered on top of each other. "Fine, tape everything. Let's get on with this investigation so we can get the hell out of here. Gentlemen, I am going to read you your rights again." He proceeded to Mirandize Clint and Jeff, and then asked if they understood. "I understand what you're saying, but no one has told us why they are detaining us. We have not broken any law, and that includes the Florida speed limits. Gentlemen, you are being held on charges of first-degree murder, willful homicide, and/or battery and robbery." "I think it's time for you to let us make our phone call," said Clint, rising. He turned his back on the lawyer. "I use that phone on the desk. You are allowed one call, and please make it brief." Clint placed the call to Texas. The lawyer, who had handled all the family legal needs, their financial portfolio, and the subsequent trust management, came on the line. Harry Prentice was a good friend as well as a good lawyer. "Harry," said Clint, "we got a problem." And he recounted the story right up to the phone call. "Put the state's attorney on," said Harry. "I'll set a few ground rules. They are not to interrogate you without the attorney I am going to send there immediately. A very personal friend and classmate who practices criminal justice in Tallahassee. Tell him nothing till Gil Roberts gets there, and that should be in a couple of hours. Hold tight, keep your mouth shut, be firm, but not belligerent, and most of all, don't give him any cause to get rough." Clint returned the phone to the lawyer, who kept nodding his head and finally spoke. "Yes, sir, we'll handle it in just that manner. Yes, I know Congressman Phillips, yes, sir. I understand his view of things like this. Yes, sir, but we have sufficient evidence. No, sir, I will not discuss it with you or anyone until Mr. Roberts gets here. Yes, sir, I understand." The lawyer hung up. "You got some powerful friends, but it won't help. We have you as dead to rights as if you had a smoking gun in your hand and an eyewitness statement by one of the victims to boot." It was 5 hours later that they came to escort Jeff and Clint from the holding cell to the interrogation room where they first met Gil Roberts. "You guys been treated all right?" the young lawyer asked. "They've left us pretty much alone, but I sure would like something to eat. I'm as hungry as a newborn calf looking for his mama's tit," replied Clint. Roberts turned to the state's attorney, who had returned for the meeting, and just looked at him. The lawyer picked up the phone and ordered up a tray. "I think we've lucked out," whispered Jeff to Clint. "This guy seems to wield a big stick." The tray arrived with some sandwiches and 2 cans of soda. "Okay, gentlemen," said Wilford Banks, "let us proceed. First of all, the formal charges, next the book-in procedure, and then incarceration. We, of course, will ask for no bail, as this is a first-degree murder investigation. I would like to review the evidence you have against my clients." "Mr. Roberts, sir, we found your clients on the scene. We have an eyewitness." "Hold on a minute. Eyewitness? I was led to believe that both tourists are dead." "That is correct, sir. The husband and wife are dead, but the rear seat passenger, shot once, is not. That person has identified the assailants." "May I see that part of the report, please?" "Sir, you may have a copy of the entire report. We are not trying a railroad job here, but we have sufficient evidence to indict." The man went to the wall phone, punched in a number, spoke briefly, and returned to the table. "And how about the charges?" Gil asked. We are starting with murder, first degree. We have added assault with a deadly weapon, robbery, and attempted murder in the case of the passenger. The eyewitness? Yes, the eyewitness. The state's attorney's impatience was showing. Is this gentleman also German? Yes, sir. Does this eyewitness speak English? Very little. I would like to talk to the eyewitness before we go much further. Gil Roberts sensed a hole in the case, and he was ready to bore in. I do not know whether that will be possible, considering his condition. Well, I would appreciate you checking that. Banks left the room. The three sat silent until he returned. They feel there could be a problem with disturbing the patient. I think I would like to insist that we give it a try, and I would like an interpreter there before we all go to a great deal of trouble. If, with the interpreter's help, you still have an eyewitness of credibility, we will proceed. Banks' voice raised in protest. Sir, I think this is premature. I do not, and there will be no further interrogation of my clients until we hear the witness say, these are the people you are looking for. Oh, very well, he said as he slammed his pen on the table. I'll call the doctor and see if he will accept a visit. This is a possible with concern to the witness' health status. As the state's attorney rose to make his call, an officer came in with a copy of the report. Gil Roberts read the report. It was well written, clear, concise, and depicted the crime and the subsequent events. You can see here he says there were two men. Their truck had the name on the side. Does that describe your truck? Well, started Clint, it is not totally our truck. We own the tractor, but the box, the trailer, belongs to the shipper, Schwartz Industries. But in any case, that is what is written on the side of the trailer? Yes, sir, but we think the time frame is all wrong. There is a time lag, but they won't tell us what time the crime was committed. I don't think they will place the time of day until the coroner determines the time of death. They can't do that until they do a PM, replied the lawyer. The door to the room opened, and Wilfred Banks came in. The doctor says we can ask him a few questions, not more than 5 minutes. If we can't get your answers by then, we are going to incarcerate without bail, and you can file your motions. Fine with us, piped up Jeff. We have nothing... He stopped as Clint threw him a look that would stop a charging bull. The two-car convoy arrived at the hospital, where the four men were showed to the victim's room. There were reporters and news camera people all over the halls of the hospital. Now, how the hell did they get here? Questioned Gil Roberts. It's all we need, a media circus. They went into the hospital room. The interpreter was waiting for them by the window. The man lying on the bed was awake, but looking towards the interpreter. As he turned his head, bewilderment crossed his face. The state's attorney told him their purpose, but when the interpreter re-spoke the query in German, the man shook his head. Nein, Schwarz, nicht weißer? The interpreter translated. He says his assailants are dark-skinned, not white men. What do you mean, Afro-Americans? Asked the state's attorney. He could actually mean anyone with dark skin, such as an Afro-American, a Hispanic, American Indian, or even a man with a heavy tan. They are all dark, but he is certain these are not the men. On the sidewalk outside the hospital, Wilfred Banks was all apologies. He also timidly asked if there was to be any legal action over the false arrests. Clint replied for both brothers. We don't need trouble, and that would cause more harm than good. I think the quieter this thing is kept, the better chance you have of apprehending the true criminals. Is there anything we can do to make up for this travesty? Gil Roberts answered. I'll send my bill to you, and I think the guys will call it square. I'm starved, piped up Jeff. They left, and Gil Roberts drove the two McCord brothers back to their rigs. Chapter 3. They arrived in Tampa just one day late. I understand you guys are new, but this is a hell of a way to start off a career. We use on-demand inventory control, and you almost cost us a day's production. You got any idea what that would cost? Clint started to explain the problem, but in the middle of the explanation the man said, Oh yeah, I saw your mugs on the noon news. Okay, you've had enough shit for one day. Back 'em in, let's get rid of your loads. Clint maneuvered the first rig into the dock area as Jeff called their Tampa contact from the number in the directory their broker had given them. The box hit the rear bumpers affixed to the edge of the dock with a soft thump. Clint locked down the brakes, jumped down, and placed the chocks against the wheels. He went to the rear of the truck, raised the overhead door of the trailer, and the automatic hydraulic dock leveler lifted itself into the air, extended its lip, and placed the steel board into the rear of the truck. The unloading commenced immediately. An electric forklift entered the rear of the truck, slid the forks under the palletized loads, and lifted, backed out of the truck, swung around, and headed into the confines of the warehouse. The second fork repeated the operation, and by the time it was out of the truck, the first unit had returned for its second load. Meanwhile, Jeff had backed into the next dock door, and the same procedure was in operation at the same time. 1 hour later, loads off and all the papers in shape, Clint and Jeff returned to their cabs. "I really think I'm going to like this life," yelled Jeff as he mounted the steps to the cab of his rig. "Outside of our little scuffle with the law, it's been just great," replied Clint. "Little scuffle?" blared Jeff. "That's like saying going 5 rounds with Rocky Marciano was like a sparring practice." Jeff fired up the electronic road map in his cab. Deftly, he punched in the zip code of Tampa, then the street they were looking for. The screen came alive, popped a Florida map, zeroed in on Tampa, enlarged the area, zeroed in on the street, and again enlarged the placement of the address. By backtracking 2 maps, Jeff found their present position and mapped out their route to the Tampa Bay dock area, Building 20. He keyed the CB radio and told Clint to follow him. He had located their pickup point. They fired up the Cat diesels of their Peterbilt 379s, checked the gauges, and when the air pressure, oil pressure, and tacks read properly, both men let off on the parking brakes and drove off, playing follow the leader. Their route carried them up onto I-4, then to Exit 1. They took the off-ramp, which dropped them onto 21st Street, through Ybor City, and on to the dock area. They found berth 209, the home of the Eastern Import-Export Trading Company, Incorporated. Jeff went to the office to find their load and proper loading docks. Clint did a check of the fuel levels under both hoods. Their fuel supply was half, and he estimated they could make Miami, where the load was to be delivered. As he walked around the front of the semi, another driver came out from behind his rig. "Hey, those Pete's are some rigs. New?" "Yeah, just came in from the West Coast with a load of engines, and now we have a pickup here for Miami." Listen, gas up just down the street. Amos's truck stop. The fuel in Miami is 10 cents higher. Besides, Amos serves the best barbecue in all of Florida. One more thing. Go straight down 75 and across the alley. It's a few miles longer, but those damn tolls on the Sunshine have gone through the roof. Be careful of our friendly picture takers near Sarasota and again at Naples. The alley has been cleaned for about a week, and they usually run about a month before they set a trap again." "Thanks. You've been a big help to a couple of greenhorns." "We get 2 loads of imported toys for a warehouse in Miami," said Jeff as he jumped into the cab. "I got directions to the dock space and the door numbers, so let's get on it." As with any load they were to pick up, the brothers checked the bills of lading to ascertain the stated contents of the load as well as the weight. In this case, they were supposed to pick up only 31,000 pounds, so they were not going to get loaded weight slips from a commercial scale. They backed into their assigned doors, presented the paperwork, and waited while 6 forklifts loaded the trucks in less than 15 minutes. Both men checked their suspension system. After assuring themselves that they were under the weight, they met in front of Clint's truck. "I guess they want us out of here, like now." "The more times they load the outgoing loads, the less space they need to load more trucks. This way they don't have to build additional warehouse space to push a lot more product. It's a simple economic decision. More forklifts or more warehouse. The forklifts are cheaper." As they pulled away from the docks, Clint picked up the mic to the CB and said, "Take a left, go 3 blocks, take a right." "Where are we going?" "I got a surprise for you, a real present." As Jeff made the right, Amos's truck stop popped into view. "Food!" shouted Jeff. "Yeah, supposedly the best barbecue in all of Florida, and we'll tank up here. One of the drivers back there told me fuel was 10 cents a gallon cheaper." "Boy, we'll make enough on the saving that I can get a decent meal." A decent meal for you would feed 4 regular people." The meal was devoured, and the truck driver was right. The barbecue was almost as good as Texas. After they fueled up, the men guided the loaded rigs out of the truck stop and followed Jeff's directions to Interstate 75, heading south. The next leg was on. Clint had warned Jeff of the road traps, so Jeff was staying well within the speed limits. After the big meal and the monotony of the engine drone, Jeff had trouble keeping his eyes open. About 8 miles south of Punta Gorda on I-75, Jeff pulled into a rest stop. They were a little hesitant after their last experience in a Florida rest stop, but Jeff could not keep his eyes open. He secured his truck, put on the headphones, and set the radio-installed alarm clock. He had to get a little shut-eye. Clint pulled into the space next to him and keyed the mic on the CB. "Good idea. See you in a few." The alarm almost drove Jeff through the roof of the cab. He hadn't realized he had left the volume up that high. He reached into the cooler and pulled out a cola. He removed the keys from the ignition, clambered down from the cab, and strolled over to the other truck. He woke Clint with a couple of sharp raps on the side panel and then made a visit to the head. As he exited the toilets, Clint came ambling up. Jeff was doing a few sitting-up exercises when Clint joined him. "Not a bad idea to shake the sleep out," said Clint. "Yeah," answered Jeff. "My lids were as heavy as fishing weights." They grabbed their colas and headed for the rigs. They were ready to roll. As Jeff exited the rest stop, he noticed the plethora of police cars heading south. "Some jerk probably piled up and took others with him," he said, mostly to himself, as Clint pulled in behind him and blinked his lights. He shifted into cruising range, readjusted the air-cushioned seat to his exact liking, put the headphones back on, and got a really in station on the stereo system. When they bought the units, they purchased a quadraphonic sound system, AM/FM, cassette, and CD players. Jeff was going to make sure they had the right music. Clint's little hoard of opera and classical stuff wouldn't hold a candle to the stuff he would have in the next couple of years. Jeff's mind wandered. He wondered how many years he and his brother could keep up this kind of life. Both were extremely active, and this seemed to be very sedentary. The miles whizzed by. This baby could really eat up the miles, he thought to himself. He was enjoying the scenery changes. "We're about 10 miles north of Naples, cruising at 60 miles an hour, and the weather is perfect. Are we going straight into Miami?" "I can see no reason not to," came the answer over the CB. But just north of the Naples swing, Jeff found out why there were so many cops heading south. Chapter 4. The roadblock was stopping every moving thing on the road. The entire road, including the shoulders, was blocked off, and the state police were inspecting everything coming down the pike. Jeff waited his turn and pulled up to the officer holding up his hand, Clint right behind him. 2 policemen, just behind him, stood with shotguns at the ready, and off to one side were 2 dogs with their handlers. "Would you please step down from the cab and bring your papers with you?" Jeff and Clint alit, papers in hand. The lead officer glanced through the papers and nodded to the 2 dog handlers. They immediately came forward with the 2 shepherds that started sniffing like there was a bitch in heat. They circled both rigs in opposite directions. The first officer said, "Would one of you mind unlocking and rolling up your cargo door?" Clint went to the rear of the trailer with the officer, unlocked the door, but did not cut the seal on the hasp. "I think I said roll up your door." "Sir, that seal is put there by the shipper. We are required to deliver this load to Miami, seal intact." "Mister, don't be a wise ass. I know about seals, and I'm going to ask you for the last time. Get the door open." "No, sir. If you want that seal broken, you're going to have to break it." And the cop did. As the door was rolled up, the cop shot Clint an ominous look and motioned to the dog handlers. The dogs came to about 5 feet of the open doors and went wild. They strained at their leashes, jumped and pirouetted, pulling at their handlers to let them loose in the trailer. The cop smiled, spoke briefly into his radio, and 4 officers came running. "This is getting to be old hat," said Jeff as they peered out from behind their bars in the state police substation. "We haven't gone the length of the state, and we have wound up in jail twice." Jeff asked who Clint had called with their one phone call, and he replied that he had called their only contact in Florida, Gil Roberts. "When do you think he'll be here?" questioned Jeff. "He said he was going to come in his private jet. The air service to Naples was spotty, so the fastest and easiest way was private. He estimated 10 to 10:30 tonight. When we get out of this mess, I think we should go into peanut farming." "Yeah, and then we would be arrested for growing pot. No, we'll get out of this mess." It was more like 11:30 when Gil Roberts said hello from outside their cell. "I've arranged bail, did it on the way in so there'd be no delay. The small problem is that they will keep the trailers impounded." "As far as I'm concerned, they can have it," said Jeff, as the jailer arrived to free them. "We have got to go to a meeting before you can leave," said Gil. "There are some restrictions on your release, and they want to discuss them first." The men left the cell area and were escorted to the administrative wing of the station. Instructed to wait a few minutes, they finally were motioned into a small office. There was a man in a brown suit, brown shoes, shaggy brown hair, standing with his back to the door as they entered. He turned, and his jaw dropped. Clint looked up, and a smile spread over his handsome face. "You old S.O.B., what the hell have you gone and gotten yourself into now?" Clint strode across the room in 2 steps and grabbed the man's hand. "Gentlemen, let me introduce my nom-buddy, commanding officer, and best friend all in one. Bill, this is my brother Jeff and our attorney Gil Roberts. Gentlemen, Bill Clark, our ticket to truth and freedom." Sandwiches were sent in. Jeff was hungry again, and the conversation moved from their nom days to why they were sitting in this jail. As Bill heard the story, he kept nodding his head. When Clint finished, he nodded again, stood, and started on his side of the story. "These dopers are going nuts trying to get their product into the U.S. This particular shipment probably left Colombia 2 months ago. It was shipped to the Far East, repackaged and crated, then it was shipped to Tampa, presumably as imported toys or some such crap, and then it would be sent to Miami for distribution. Shipments like this are arriving all over the country, destined for major distribution areas for the dope." "Whatever happened to fast boats, low-flying planes, and mules carrying the junk into the United States?" "We're getting wiser as we go along. We work well with the feds. Their narcs feed us, we comply, and we're making lots of arrests. That poses a problem for these jokers. We're slowing down their supply, and that means they have to get the junk in here so their suppliers on the street won't go elsewhere or lose their trade altogether." "You mean they ship this crap halfway around the world and then ship it back? Well, that takes too long." Not if you're making shipments every day. Well, sure, the first ones take 2 months, but then they get the shipments almost every day here because they're shipping every day." Clint sat back in his chair. He hated dope. He didn't even smoke. Anything that would deteriorate the body was hateful to Clint. Jeff felt the same. After all, they couldn't maintain their black belts with hangovers or screwed-up minds from dope. "Okay, this is all well and good, but what about us?" asked Clint. "We knew soon after we arrested you that you guys were the lambs being led to slaughter. The dopers feel they have a better chance with a common carrier and a far better chance with independents, like you two. When we brought you here, we checked your papers, all in order. The real clincher was the seal, and the tip-off was that the first shipper let you keep their trailers to make the second run. As I see it, and I may be wrong, they will have a load for the West Coast, and you will just be reloaded, same box, and returned to Los Angeles." "Well, we don't know anything about that, but I thought we'd get a new trailer with each new shipment. We didn't. I thought the trailer belonged to the California shipper, and why would they want us tooling around the country with their box?" "There is a thread through this mess," Bill responded. "Well, the only constant is our broker. She sent us to Tampa, and when we called for the second load, it was from her contact in Tampa." "That's a start. So now how about a little help?" asked Bill. Jeff started to object. Clint put his hand on his brother's arm. "Hold it, Jeff. We have a multiple problem. First, we've been arrested for running dope. Second, Bill is a personal friend, and if he needs help, he's got it. Third, if it helps our country, then we have no other choice but to help." The room was silent. Gil Roberts sat off to one side, and Bill Clark sat back in his chair. Clint stared benignly at Jeff, and Jeff squirmed. Okay. You're right. We're in. Let's do it." It took the rest of the night to formulate the plans. The brothers were to continue on their way with the shipments. Some of the crates had been fitted with transponders that would be activated when the crates were removed from the truck. When they got to their destination, all they had to do was act innocent and call for their next load. If there was any question about the delay in getting there, they would just tell the consignee that they stopped for a little fun and relaxation at one of the roadside haunts. Bill outfitted both men with beepers. This was a normal adjunct to today's truck driver, as being in touch meant more hauls and therefore more profit. In truth, these beepers were multifunctional. These beepers were also wires, tiny transmitters that had a range of 3 miles, and the brothers were assured that there would always be help within that radius. "Not to worry, baby," smiled Bill as he adjusted the electronic gear. He then tuned his receiver to the proper wavelength. "We got you tagged like a brand on a steer's ass," laughed Bill. "If everything goes well, we should have this baby wrapped up in a couple of days, and I'm buying the steak dinners," said Bill, as the foursome left the office for the parking lot. "At least no one could get near our rigs in that fenced yard of yours," said Jeff, as they fired up the big cat engines and checked their gauges. As the 379s pulled out of the substation and headed for Alligator Alley, Jeff remarked, "We should paint a monogram on our homes." "You have anything in mind?" "Oh, something like cordless." Both men laughed at each other over the CB, adjusted their seats, and sat back, enjoying the ride and the scenery. Chapter 5. The rigs left the Naples substation, and Clint consulted the onboard road map computer. It showed the Everglades Parkway, nicknamed Alligator Alley, turned into a toll road just after they made the eastern swing toward Miami. In addition, that road took them into Fort Lauderdale rather than into Miami, almost 25 miles north of where they wanted to be. "There's an alternative route a little farther south," Jeff said. "Yeah, that's Route 41. Looks pretty good, and we'll be able to see some of the countryside," said Clint. "Yeah," answered Jeff, "and we'll probably see a restaurant or two so we can stop for something to eat." "You have the fridge aboard. The dry stores can bring up the bread and other things for your empty stomach, so we are on our way. No more stops until we get to the warehouse that we have to deliver this stuff to. No more stops until we dock at the unloading door," he repeated for emphasis. They made the course corrections, avoided the toll station, and found 41. Clint upshifted until they reached cruising, and Jeff called over that he had made himself a sandwich. As they cruised along, Clint reminisced about their younger days. Then he thought of the last few hours, and with minor trepidation of the upcoming scenario about to unfold. "With our recent luck," he mused, "we'll be ass-deep in alligators. Nothing is simple when you're dealing with the low-lives we're encountering." He slapped the wheel for emphasis. Clint thought drug dealers were the lowest form of criminal, and he knew that he and Jeff were exposing themselves to danger, however slight. Clint had entered Gil Roberts' phone and fax numbers onto the card file in the computer. He had taken the list of numbers Bill Clark had given him and entered them also. In case of trouble, the calls could be automatically dialed, and with the new searching dialer, he'd just have to activate the sequence, and the dialer would keep searching until it found an answering number. The road was basically good, except for the numerous small towns, way stations, and gas stops. Clint was continually up and down in the gearbox, shifting to keep the rig running in the right RPM. Because of the constant slowing and speeding up, Clint figured they had not saved any fuel dollars, but he was enjoying the ride, and after all, they didn't have anyone waiting for them back home. Pop had everything he needed and didn't need a babysitter. As he shifted for the umpteenth time that hour, he realized how much of a help the new transmissions are. With a flick of a finger, he could shift up or down in each gear. If he had to shift into more than one notch, he manually shifted the gearbox and then could flip the lever for another speed up or down. It saved a lot of elbow grease. Jeff keyed the CB as they started to pass through the northern tip of Everglade National Forest. "How much longer to Miami?" he asked. "A little over an hour," answered Clint. It was still early in the morning, so the sun was coming up, right in their faces. Just an hour and a half later, they crossed the bridge onto Dodge Island, home of the Miami dock area. As they slowed, coming off the bridge, they could see the cruise ships moored along both sides of the road. "Someday," dreamed Clint, "when we have a little spare time, we'll hit one of those babies for a week of sun and sea." They pulled up to the guard post at the head of the commercial dock area. Jeff handed down the papers, and the guard went to a computer to check the numbers. He returned. "Building C, doors 47 and 48. And he handed him a map of the island. Jeff flicked into low range, dropped it into first, and slowly moved away from the guard post. The activity on the dock was hectic. There were stacks of containers 5 high on both sides of the road. They were marked from every country on Earth. They were being moved by immense forklifts, topside loaders, and 4-wheeled center carriers. You couldn't tell whether they were empty or full by the way they were being handled. Jeff followed the pencil-lined drawing of the map to Building C and the doors they were assigned. He was beginning to handle his rig like an old pro. One wide swing to straighten out the tractor at the far end of the turn, and one shot at the dock. He was home free. "Keep your mouth shut, act like a rube, and do as you're told," cautioned Clint. The 2 men jumped up on the dock where a sullen Hispanic asked if they spoke any Spanish. Clint, who could speak the language after working with the Mexican hands at the ranch, decided to play dumb. Sorry, no habla," and he shrugged his shoulders. The man put his dirty fingers to his mouth and let out a shrill whistle. Shortly, an immense black man driving a 10,000-pound capacity forklift came careening around the corner of the first pile of empty pallets. Driving was really a misnomer. Abusing would be more like it. He drove the fork with his foot to the floor on the accelerator and used the brake to slow and turn. The tires smoked as he changed direction and squealed as he rounded the corner. He screeched to a halt within inches of Clint, who didn't move. "Ain't afraid, huh?" questioned the fork driver. "Y'all didn't flinch." "You look like you know what the hell you're doing," answered Clint. The black man showed a wide grin and jumped down to take the paperwork out of Clint's hand. "That's some rig you're pushing, do?" "Yeah, kinda," answered Clint, staring the man down. "Well, we gonna get you unloaded, but the dock super want to see you first." Clint pushed open the door of the cubicle, housing a mountain of a man who didn't fit the space. It was too small, the desk was too small, and his butt overhung the broken chair he was sitting on. "You got a load out yet?" Supervisor asked. "No, we're supposed to call our broker." "She called for you before you got here. They got a load at D for pickup and transport to Los Angeles." "Well, that'll make it easy. Don't have to leave the dock area, and we're loaded again. Thanks." The brothers backed their rigs into the assigned doors at Building D. "Where's the joker who has our load?" said Jeff to the back of a tall, rather skinny man. The only reaction from the man was that his hand reached back and pointed off to the right. Clint and Jeff turned and headed toward the office, about 50 yards away. As they walked along, a gas-powered golf cart came whizzing by, almost knocking the 2 brothers down. "Hey!" yelled Jeff. "Look where you're going, ass!" He stopped short of finishing the word, as the face that turned around in the seat was no man, not even close. "If that's the only language you can use, may I suggest you return to school and improve your vocabulary?" A small amount of flaming red hair peeked from beneath the brim of the baseball cap she wore. "Hey, sorry," stammered Jeff, "but you almost ran us down." "If that was what I wanted to do, you would have been run down, not missed, Buster. Now you tell me what load you're looking for, and I'll get you the hell out of here." Jeff and Clint handed over their papers to the woman. She glanced at the shipper's bills of lading, consulted the small computer hooked to her wrist, and flicked on her talker. "We have the Bobbsey twins at doors 8 and 11. We need A32, 33, 34 on one of the rigs, and A35, 36 on the other." She held the unit to her ear, received the incoming message, and turned. "If you gentlemen would return to your trucks, I'm sure we can get you out of here very quickly." "May I ask a question?" said Clint. "Forget it," replied the lady. "I don't date truckers, I don't mix business with pleasure, and I don't have time. Are those enough answers to the questions you were going to ask?" "I was going to ask," continued Clint, "where the restrooms are." "Sorry. Every truck jockey that backs into those doors thinks I'm fair game. I'm not, nor will I ever be." "Hey, chill out. But you got to admit, any guy that won't at least take a second look at you has got to like boys better than girls." The three of them stood looking at each other, and then burst out laughing. "Sorry I got so defensive, but you get tired of the same old BS from guys wanting me to see the inside of their large car." "Yeah, I guess it's an old twist on asking you to see my etchings," returned Clint. Jeff decided it was no go for a little poontang, and left to see that his truck was loaded. Clint stayed on. The two looked at each other for a moment, and the lady finally said, "Why don't you ask what a girl like me is doing in a place like this?" "Hey, a job's a job. I see many a lady pushing a rig or working the docks. The good, the bad, and the ugly." "Where do I fit in?" questioned the girl. "Name first, yes to dinner, and then I'll tell you where you fit in." "You gotta be nuts," she replied, jumped on her cart, and took off, Clint following her with his eyes. He smiled. He knew he would have dinner with her later. The loading was slowly progressing. Unlike the Tampa operation, there was only one fork to a truck, and these guys thought they were doing you a favor to load your truck. Story continues on Tape 1, Side B. Clint and Jeff stood around for 2 hours before the redhead came back with their signed paperwork. In the meantime, Jeff had jumped up into the cab, fired up the computer, sent the numbers on the incoming load to the shipper, and received a fax, a bill from the shipper to the receiver for the freight charges from the previous stop. They would drop the bills off on their way out. The same process would have taken 2 weeks just a few years ago. Now it was a matter of minutes, and the shipper had his invoice printed, delivered, and entered in his books, with a copy of all the paperwork sent to Dad McCord. The age of electronic wizardry had arrived. "Clint," said Jeff, "I think we'll split up for a while. I want to see Orlando and the mouse. I also understand you have to fight the women off with clubs in that town. Are you heading directly to the next stop?" "Now you go ahead. I think I'll spend the weekend here in Miami. Keep in touch tomorrow and the next day by phone. Click the number into the beeper if you're away from the cab. We'll plan on meeting on the road somewhere near Orlando so we can make the trip back to the West Coast together. What's happening with the you-know-what? That's none of our business right now. Bill is tracking that shipment we just dropped off, and it's their baby. We promised to act dumb as a fence post, and there's no one dumber than us." "Okay, then. As soon as I'm loaded, I'm off to visit Mickey Mouse. I'll see you in 3 days near Orlando someplace." Clint went back to his truck and watched as they end-loaded the last double-stacked pallets. The loading boss came back on her little cart and had Clint sign the papers. Then he pulled the door down, double-locked it, and she put 2 seals on, one for each lock, and took off without more than a smile. Clint jumped off the end of the dock, removed the chocks, and mounted the cab. As he reached for the ignition key, Jeff gave him 2 blasts on the air horn and pulled out of the loading dock area. Clint continued his cab check, entered his time in the log, and dropped the gears into low. When he reached the guard shack, he could see Jeff at the top of the bridge, pulling off Dodge Island. Clint called down to the guard, "Where can I store this rig till I get some chow and maybe take in a movie or something?" "I'll tell you where not to leave it, and that is anywhere near downtown or near the airport. They'll have it emptied and stripped in 2 hours, and that's if they just don't grab the whole rig." "He's a lot of help," muttered Clint as he pulled away from the guard post. As he shifted into the next gear, his phone rang. "I thought you might like to do that dinner thing," said the voice. It was instant recognition, the redhead from the warehouse. "Where the hell did you get my cellular number?" questioned Clint. "Your partner's a great guy, and helpful," came the reply. "Sure, but I need a safe place to bed my baby down where I'll find it when I get back." "No problem. See that red Mustang GT, 2 cars ahead of you? Just follow it. It's about a half-hour drive, but I assure you that where we're going to park it, truck and load, will be intact when you return to it." Clint continued to shift up through the gears as they headed west on 836. They intersected with I-95 just after passing the airport and headed south. Within the half-hour time, they were in Perrine, a suburb south of Miami. The Mustang cut over to US 1, and a half-mile south, they cut left at 144th Street. They were in a residential area, and Clint worried that he would be in trouble with the law when the Mustang pulled into a cut at a heavy bank of ficus trees and drove up a long driveway. The redhead got out and waved Clint into a pull-off where he parked the truck and locked it up. "It'll be safe here until we get back. You're right near I-95 and can't get lost on your way north." Clint looked around. The piece of property was probably 10 acres, a large rambling white house with a red tile roof set back in the far corner. "We used to own 200 acres of mango groves here. Between the bad years for the crops and the high prices being paid for land, my dad sold out, except for this little piece. My folks figured they would spend a long time retiring here. What with the money they got for the land and some of Dad's investments, they were well set." "I guess you could say that. It's beautiful here. Are they off on a trip?" "Mom died a year after they sold out, just as she had finished fixing up the house the way they always wanted. Dad kind of sits around, reads, and misses the lady he was married to for almost 40 years. "Oh, I'm very sorry, really." The two went up to the house where the redhead introduced Clint to her dad and then took off. The two men stood there, eyeing each other, until finally Clint said, "I'm sorry to intrude, sir." "Want you to know you're the first trucker she ever brought here. Must see something in you." With that, he went over to the sideboard and offered Clint a drink. Better not. No booze for now, but I'll take a Coke if you have one." The man bent over the small refrigerator in the base of the cabinet and pulled a classic Coke from the interior. Soon the redhead returned, and her father left the room. "I don't even know your name." "Some people call me Marge, some Margie. My name is Marguerite, and that's what I prefer to be called. Now how about a swim, and then a shower, and we can go see if there's a restaurant open that still serves a halfway decent meal." After their shower, they piled into the red Mustang, pulled out of the driveway, accelerated, and headed for Coconut Grove down the old Cutler Road. They arrived a half hour later, parked the car, and went into a trendy fern bar and restaurant. "Don't let the looks fool you. I know the owner, and he keeps up appearances for the tourists. Coconut Grove is an artist colony, so he caters to them. The old-time clients still get the best seafood in South Florida." They were shown to their table, but no waiter appeared. After a long wait, Clint asked, "Do we have to get our own food?" "I called before we left the house and placed our order," she responded. "How's that for efficiency?" "Works for me, lady." The food was excellent. They started off with conch chowder, had a stone crab appetizer, and then 2 monstrous Florida lobster tails were brought to the table. They had been split and stuffed with fresh shrimp, mussels, and poached mango. Clint dug in as if he had never eaten before. Halfway through the entree, the waiter came to get Marguerite, something about the owner in the kitchen. She excused herself and left, and within 2 minutes a tall, dark man stood in front of Clint. "Do not make any false moves, senor. There are 2 men in this room that will shoot you at the first sign of disobedience. Please get up and follow me quietly." The man headed for the door with Clint in tow. As they reached the dark parking lot, Clint saw a man coming at him with a club, but he couldn't avoid him. He felt the hit as it crunched into his head. He felt as if he were falling down a long tunnel which had a flashing light at the far end. He put out his hands to try to stop the fall, but he could not reach the sides of the tunnel where the handholds were. He kept falling and falling until the light went out. Why was everyone singing? What was that strange tune? Who was playing? The light started to seep under the heavy shade that closed off the world. It got lighter, but it was fuzzy, like the belly of a kitten frolicking on a carpet. Ever so slowly he started to feel more light, and it was warm to his face. He tried to open his eyes, but the pain was excruciating. Maybe that was the song he heard, the blood pounding against his temples. He did not try to move. He must know where he was before he made it known he was coming out of whatever position he had been in. He tried again to break the seal that seemed to hold the lid to the bottom of his eyes. His head pounded. He could not move his arms or head. "He is moving, Ramon. See, I think he is coming out of it." The voice was familiar, but where had he heard it? Then Clint remembered. It was the voice that had ordered him from the restaurant. "Well, my young friend, how does your head feel? Is that your first experience with heroin?" "I don't take heroin." Clint's mouth had turned to rubber. His throat felt like there was a tube down it, and he could not open his eyes. "Oh, I know you do not take narcotics. We just helped you on your way towards its demanding pleasures." Ramon snickered evilly. "Where am I?" "In a moment. First, we want you to recover your senses so we can clear up a few unanswered questions and problems we do not have the answers for. Remove the tape from his eyes. He will be no trouble." So that's why I can't get my eyes open, thought Clint. The tape was ripped from his face. He felt a layer of skin tear like a stamp leaving an envelope, and then he felt the warmth of his own blood as it trickled down his face. Clint took a deep breath, steadied his nerves with a second deep breath, and opened his eyes. The light blinded him, and he snapped his lids shut to ease the new pain of the intense light. "Open your eyes, my young friend. We have someone who is here with you." Clint struggled with his lids again. The pain was still intense, but his determined will forced his brain to open the lids. Little by little, the light bore in. He held each movement for a second, and then tried again. It was a battle of will over pain. Clint had known pain. The Viet Cong knew how to make a man suffer. The scars on Clint's body bore testimony to his ability to endure it, to keep his focus in spite of any torment his body might feel. He remembered clearly the prolonged firefight in Nam. They had taken him prisoner and were working him over to extract the information they wanted. Clint could recall the physical tortures he had withstood, but forced these from his conscious mind. When his troops finally broke through, he was a mess. 3 months in a hospital, and then that USO torch song singer that screwed his brains out in the back of a deuce and a half. But that was a long time ago, and this is now. The blinding light in his eyes kept his captors in darkness. "Now what the hell good is it to open my eyes if you won't turn that friggin' light off?" The voice he was growing to know said, "Shut the light. We will give him a chance to tell all we need to know." The light snapped off, and Clint's eyes focused slowly on the blurs and blobs of figures around him. It was another 5 minutes before Clint could actually see. His head pounded a constant rhythm. "I could get to like this tune," he thought to himself, as the world continued to return. He was trying to flex his muscles under his clothing. He discovered he was bound tightly to a wooden chair that was fastened to the floor. "I'm in a hell of a fix, and I don't even know why," he thought. As if reading his thoughts, the now familiar voice continued, "I suppose you want to know what you are doing here." "All I know is I don't belong here. I've done nothing to you, and I haven't the slightest idea who the hell you are or what you want." Clint tried to keep a reasonable pace as he kept assessing the odds to free himself. "Oh, but you do belong here. We know, for instance, that you are the police." "Well, that's a bunch of bullshit. I'm no cop, never was, nor do I plan to be." "Tell me, my friend, why you brought a shipment to us from Tampa that had the crates implanted with homing devices?" "I don't know what the hell you're talking about. I didn't plant any homing devices, whatever they are, in your crates or anywhere else." "Oh, but that is not true. As we were unloading your shipment, we scanned each crate. You are not the first narc to go undercover as a hauler. What do you think? We are children playing games?" There was no satisfactory answer he could make, so Clint silently waited while his eyes accustomed themselves to the light. Scanning the room, he realized he was in a warehouse of some kind, possibly back where he had dropped his load on Dodge Island. There were 2 other men in the room. Both were armed, both were guerrillas, and both were mute. In the guise of stretching his neck and shoulders, he grabbed a quick look around the room for a possible avenue of escape. "Don't bother yourself with what you are thinking. We are very remote and well protected. If you did overpower the 3 of us," and he laughed, "you are surrounded by an alligator and snake-infested swamp. We could untie you and you could make a run for it, but it would defeat the purpose of this little escapade." Clint did not believe him, as his keen hearing picked up traffic noise as well as boat noise. No, he was not in any swamp, but he sure as hell was tied to a chair that was fastened to the floor, and he had one hell of a headache. "Now, Mr. McCord, let us stop playing games. I want to know what government agency you are connected with, what your plans are, and when you plan to make a raid." "Hey, buddy, stuff it. You can make up all this shit, but it doesn't mean diddly squat. I'm a trucker. I got my first load in L.A. and hustled it to Tampa. They gave me this load from Miami, and now I have a load destined for L.A. again. That's the story. That's the truth." The man ignored everything Clint said and continued, "So tell me, why did you send your brother ahead? Is he scouting? Or perhaps he does not know you are a cop?" "I am not a cop," said Clint in a calm voice. "I don't know what the hell you're talking about or who you are. I'm a trucker, nothing more, nothing less." "Victor, bring in the woman." One of the guards left the room and returned with Marguerite. At first glance, Clint felt that she had not been harmed. Her face and hair were unmarred, but her hands were fastened behind her back, and her blouse was wide open, revealing a black lace bra. She said nothing, only stared at the floor. "I am going in the other room for a short time, so you may think over what you have said. As you have great concern for her, we will take her in there with us. We want the truth, and to get it, we will exercise the plans we have for her." He sneered a dirty smile and said, "And maybe even while you watch." The 2 men took Marguerite's arms, lifted her not too gently off the floor, and dumped her unceremoniously in the far corner of the adjoining room. Ramon followed, stopping only momentarily at the door. "Your chances of survival would be greatly enhanced if you willingly tell us what we want to know." And he closed the door behind him. Clint heard the lock snap into place and relaxed his weary body for a moment. He was alone. The room was lit by a single 4-bulb fluorescent fixture hanging by 2 chains that disappeared in the blackness of the ceiling, so Clint could clearly see the far reaches of the room. There were no windows, the one door that led to the 3 Stooges, and, for some strange reason, the steel-decked floor. There was the unlit beacon that had recently blinded him, fastened to a tripod, standing directly in front of him. There was a wall-hung lamp, with a switch, on the wall near the door, but no other furnishings except the chair he sat on. Clint tested his bonds. Whoever had tied them was not a novice. He tested his feet by stretching his ankles. He could hardly move them. They were so firm in their bindings. As he analyzed his situation, he tried to straighten his body in the chair. His back was killing him. The chair creaked. A plan glimmered in his imagination. He wondered how much time he had before they returned. "I'd better get on it before Larry Moe and Godzilla come back here." With a Herculean effort, he strained his biceps to expand. The force of his effort took as much strength as he had. The ropes moved, just a tad. He concentrated on his arm muscles and insisted they comply as he focused on the biceps and his calf muscles. Over and over he flexed and relaxed his muscles until the ropes became slackened, not loose, but slack enough for the next move. Clint slithered down in his bonds, tightening the ropes against himself while in his most relaxed position, and then, with one tremendous heave, propelled himself and the chair from its floor moorings. The front legs went first, splitting right up the center to the seat. Clint rocked backwards, forcing his weight to the rear legs, and again, with a ferocious thrust, split the rear legs. As the rear legs went, the chair almost collapsed, and Clint froze, concerned that the noise would bring Ramon and the other two guerrillas in. But the first step was over. The chair was loose from the floor, and he could almost stand. 3 times he ground the legs from the seat by twisting them against the floor. As he felt each leg going, he eased his body heavily onto that leg and broke it loose from the seat. When the first leg went, he could taste release. The bonds which intertwined with the chair came loose, and he stood, pulling the loosened ropes from his hands and feet. Quickly he tore the wires from the spot lamp and pulled them apart, giving him 2 pieces, and then he broke one of those wires in 2. He had 3 pieces of wire, enough to turn the steel deck into a conductor. By stripping the ends of the 3 wires, connecting one to the outlet and the floor, the second to the outlet and a wooden chair leg, and the third from the deck to another chair leg, he had a switch, and the deck was wired. Let 'em come. Clint balanced himself on the chair, teetering on the 2 remaining legs. The men could see him as they entered. At first glance, all had to look normal as the goons came into the room. It was only a few minutes until the door opened. The first man in gaped at Clint, sitting there as if unconcerned with his plight. The second man was close on his heels, and as they stepped on the steel deck, he brought the 2 legs with the bared wires together while he rocked back on the wooden legs to keep himself from the shock emanating from the deck. The shock was not enough to do much harm, but it sure disrupted their attention span. Clint tossed the 2 chair legs in opposite directions, threw a horizontal block at the first man, and dug his elbow into the solar plexus of the second. The first man started to rise. Clint grabbed his head in a lock and with a short, sharp twist snapped the man's neck. Clint's attention turned to the second guard as he regained his breath and his feet. Clint came up, spun, and kicked the man full in the face. The blow of Clint's shoe brought the man's hands up instinctively. Clint came under his raised hands with a sharp blow to the Adam's apple, a side-cut chop to the bridge of the nose, and again the headlock and snap. The whole thing took less than 5 seconds, and Clint was ready to face number 3. He took the chair seat, and holding it like a discus, he stepped through the door to the next room. The man there was half a second too late drawing his pistol. The seat chopped him across the neck, breaking his windpipe as it struck and shattering the spinal column. All through this display, Marguerite had watched silently through the open doorway. Clint checked the carnage, then ran to her. He held her closely while stroking her face. She showed no emotion, no screaming, nothing. Clint held her in his arms. "Let's get the hell out of here," he said. "How about the alligators?" "There aren't any. We're in the middle of civilization. I heard the sounds." They ran through the warehouse into the soft Miami night, reached the car they had come in, but there were no keys. Clint returned to the shack and searched the dead men's pockets until he found the keys. In an unusual display of temper, he spun the drive wheels of the car as he made the turn toward the lights of the city from Dodge Island. With just a few directions from an otherwise silent Marguerite, Clint arrived at her house. He started to pull by the rig to get to the house when Marguerite put her hand on his arm. "Don't go up there just yet. Dad's awake, and I would like some time with you before we part." Clint pulled the car around the side of the rig opposite from the house and shut the engine down. It was a pleasant night, so he rolled down the windows. "What do you think they wanted from us?" Clint answered, "It wasn't us they wanted me. They thought I was tied to the cops." "Are you?" "Hell no, I push a rig. I try to mind my own business and just earn a living," he lied. "They must have got the idea from somewhere." "Only God knows how the idea got planted in their nasty minds, and they won't be telling much anymore." "It was gruesome, the way you killed those men." "Marguerite, you weren't in the room when they questioned and threatened me. I was injected with heroin, for God's sake. Then they promised to abuse you if I didn't give them information I didn't have." His voice trembled as he remembered he had been as close to death as he had ever been. "So you were protecting me?" She slunk back against the car seat like a kitten curling into a pillow. "Those guys wouldn't have batted an eyelash before killing you." He paused. "And me." "Are you my knight in shining armor?" I don't look at myself in that light. I'm just a poor slob trying to stay alive. Marguerite sensuously slid across the seat, placed both arms around his neck, and pulled his head toward her waiting lips. Clint felt the urge rise, but tried to ignore that for the present. The present was a short interval. Marguerite's lips closed on his, and her tongue slid deep inside his mouth. The hell with holding back, he thought to himself as he threw himself into the moment. After the second kiss, he pulled back and said, I don't want to steam up these windows, and the back seat of a car is strictly for teenagers. He helped her from the automobile, and she leaned provocatively against him as he unlocked the truck. He lifted her into the cab and followed her into his masculine domain. It was not long before Clint was happy they had ordered the 120-inch large car sleeper, and he lost himself in the moment. Clint was awakened from his slumber. Come on, sleepyhead, it's 5 a.m. and I have to get to work. Before we part, let's see if last night was a keeper. Mon plaisir, mademoiselle. He slid his hands beneath her eager bottom and lifted her atop his thighs. It was even better than he had remembered last night. The action started slowly. Marguerite's experience was not slight. Her gentle but affirmative movements brought Clint to full awareness in a matter of seconds. He responded, and soon the tempo increased. They were long at it when Clint felt he could no longer restrain himself. As the urge became more than he wanted to restrain, Marguerite increased her speed even more. Clint knew they were going to climax together and threw himself totally into the partnership. They both lay back, panting from the exertion. Then Marguerite started to rise. She purred, Sorry, Clint. I've got to get the hell out of here. I got a job and a father that is not stupid. Will I see you tonight? You bet your sweet Bippy, or whatever you call that monster between your legs. What time will you be home from work? I'll get in about 6. Listen, instead of tooling around in the rig, why not borrow my Jeep and use that today? It'll make things much simpler, and you won't be too tired to have some more fun tonight. Clint smiled as she left the cab. He could sure use a shower and about 10 pounds of food, in that order, but first things first. He punched in Jeff's cellular phone number. He was ready to hang up when it had rung 8 times. Just on the 9th ring, a sleepy voice gave a short, Hello? Jeff, Clint. Where are you, little brother? I think I'm in Orlando. I'm not sure. Did you at least have a good time? I think so. Wait a minute. Hey, Jenny, did we have a good time last night? I got to talk to you, but not on the cellulars. Too easy to eavesdrop. I'll call you in an hour. I have to get to a payphone so we can talk. Clint threw on some clothes, brushed his teeth. The lasting odor of Marguerite's perfume lingered throughout the cab. He pulled some clean duds from the closet and made a care package of those and his toiletries. Marguerite pulled up in the Mustang, threw him the keys and a big kiss, and went scooting out the driveway. Just as Clint backed out of the cab, Marguerite's father pulled up in his pickup. The Jeep is around back. Marguerite and I play this game. I don't ask, she don't tell, and we both go our separate ways. She's a big girl, and I trust her judgment. There's a key on the ring she gave you. It's for the house. There's a shower on the first floor. Be my guest. But lock up and punch the activate button on the alarm system as you leave. He left before Clint could get a word out. The shower was terrific. He stood and let the hot water beat down on his body. Between his active participation with Marguerite last night and the very hot shower this morning, the last vestiges of the drug injection were drained from his body. He felt good. He felt clean. He felt hungry. As he toweled himself, he surveyed the damage to his body in the full-length mirror. No real bad cuts, but some bruises around his head and lower back. His wrists and ankles were rubbed sore, and the skin was broken in a few places. Outside of that, he was as fit as any trucker ever ought to be. He tried to relive last night, wondering how the goons knew about the transponders so quickly. Either they had someone checking the shipment as it was unloaded, or they had been alerted prior to his arrival at the dock. In either case, he would call Bill Clark just as soon as he found a safe phone. Clint touched the activate button on the alarm system, locked the front door securely, and walked around to the back of the house where the 5-car garage housed the Jeep. His mind floated back to last night, and then to this morning. Marguerite was one hell of a woman, he thought. Clint headed west to US 1, where he had seen a couple of small shopping centers. Pulling onto the 6-lane portion of the highway, he spotted a truck stop, a great place for a substantial breakfast and banks of payphones. He jerked the Jeep into a space near the entrance. He dropped his 6-foot frame into a booth and, with a friendly yell to the waitress, asked her to bring coffee. Clint ordered eggs, pancakes, bacon, home fries, and the house specialty, fried apples. The order arrived, with the waitress looking first at him, then at the food. "You expecting somebody else?" "No, but you can bring some more coffee, and I'll try those grits, too." The waitress stared at him, pushed her eyes heavenward as if she would get an answer from above, and threw her hands up in the air. The breakfast was good, and hot. The coffee kept coming, and when the waitress came back for the 5th refill, he put his hand over the cup. "I better back off. I'm driving." She grinned, dropping the check on the table, and went over to the cash register. Clint dropped $3 on the table, and when he paid the tab, he requested $10 worth of quarters. "Ever hear of credit cards?" she asked, placing the roll on the countertop. "My mama won't let me have one since the $800 tab for those 900 calls," Clint responded, and headed for the phone bank. There were several people at the phones, but one was empty. He pulled his cellular out of his pocket and called Jeff, giving him the number of the pay phone. A minute later, the phone in the booth rang. Clint snatched it off the cradle. "Well, little brother, what you all been doing?" "I'll tell you one thing. I'm getting to think more like you about booze. I didn't have more than one drink last night, and boy, did I have a ball, mainly 'cause I stayed awake. Other than that, we did a couple of spots and then closed some joint down at what they call the Mercado. When you called this morning, I'd just fallen asleep." "I'll try to time my calls better next time. But let's get down to where it is." Clint went on and described his life since Jeff pulled away from the dock. He didn't tell about his interlude with Marguerite, although he did tell Jeff about her. Jeff remained stony silent during the recounting of the evening's happenings. When Clint told Jeff how he wound up killing 3 guys, Jeff blurted out, "The cops will be out in force trying to make your body light up like a Christmas tree." "I don't know what to do about the whole thing, but I'm going to call Bill Clark as soon as we're through talking. Now keep out of the limelight. Bury the truck in a safe place and rent a car." "Don't need a car. This young lady has one, and she don't have to go back to work for 2 more days. We may drive over to Tampa and see Busch Gardens and stuff." "Well, you be super careful in that town. That's where all this mess started. Someone may recognize you." "Yeah, okay, I'll be cool." Clint placed the next call, this one to Bill Clark. But his secretary recited that Bill was out of the office and unavailable. Clint persisted. "This is extremely important to Bill," said Clint. "I'm sure he wants to talk to me." "Please hold for one moment, sir." Clint stood leaning against the wall, receiver to his ear, swatting a fly that kept buzzing his head. There were some clicks, buzzes, and a couple of tonal noises. Finally, Bill Clark came on the line. "Where are you?" "I'm in a truck stop in Perrine, right on Route 1, answered Clint. "Well, the whole force is out looking for you. Miami police have a warrant out for you. We haven't stopped it, but we have an in with them, so we'll know if they get to you before I do." "I want to tell you what happened." "I know you do, but it's more important that we are face to face. Now tell me what truck stop, and I'll be there in half an hour." "Where the hell are you?" "Miami. Followed you right up to the time you hit Dodge Island. Our other asset took over and kept an eye on you right up to the time you pulled away from the dock, following your brother off the island." Clint gave him the address and returned to the counter. "I think I'll have one more coffee and a piece of that mango pie now, miss," he requested. "Where the hell do you put all that food?" she said as she dished up the pie and coffee. "You think I eat? You should see my brother." It was not quite a half hour when Bill walked in the door, motioned for Clint to be quiet, and follow him outside. "Well, at least you still know what you've been taught. I was at the morgue this morning. 2 snapped necks and one with a windpipe broken, as well as his neck snapped. How long did it take you? Oh, I'm getting old. Less than 20 seconds for the 3 of them. Who's the female? How do you know about that? I may be just a dumb cop now, but I was in intelligence in the Berets, or have you forgotten? Intelligence? You were my commanding officer, not a spook. Yeah. Well, you didn't have to know everything. Now tell me what happened. The 2 men strolled around the yard of the truck stop. Clint told Bill the story, including the Marguerite portion, right up to the old man letting him in the house that morning for a shower. Something stinks somewhere, said Bill. We either have a leak at our end, or they're far more efficient than we thought. They were on to you by the time you left the dock. They had to follow you, otherwise how would they know where you were eating? I mean, there's 100 little joints in the Grove, and you said you were in the dame's chariot. No, it wasn't by chance they nailed you in that restaurant. They had you pegged all the way. Couple of other strange things, continued Clint. They grabbed the woman, but they held her in the other room. If they were really going to hurt her or use her against me, don't you think she would have been in the same room? Yeah, that is strange, but they may have been playing with your mind. Maybe spring her on you to catch you off guard. I don't know, but in any case I called Jeff and told him what happened. Bill's face blanched white. You called Jeff? Hey, I may have gotten myself in a scrape yesterday, but I didn't get stupid overnight. I used the cellular to get him to a payphone. Come with me, said Bill, as he walked around the other side of the pumps. He picked up the mic off the dash of the car he had come in and spoke briefly into it. Clint, these cellular phones are just great, but they have a small flaw. They're miniature radios. Anybody can eavesdrop on these things. I'd be willing to bet a week's pay that the call was recorded. I just had an additional tail put on Jeff. We're keeping tabs on him like we were with you, but it's beyond that now. These people have shifted into a crash mode, and we better get up to their speed. Close surveillance is in order from now on. Yeah, by the way, where the hell was that tail last night? We're going to bury him on Thursday. Sorry, Clint responded. Yeah, it really stinks. Good guys losing all the time. But how could you know? That's why we lost you. They got him in the stakeout vehicle before they went in for you. When were you planning on leaving town? Probably Monday, answered Clint. I have a date tonight, so I think I'll take off Monday early and meet Jeff around lunchtime. I'm putting 2 men on you as of this moment. They'll be within sight of you all the time. Now, I know you won't be self-conscious. Bull, I won't. Do you ever try to crawl into the sack with some guy sitting in the corner watching? Clint asked sardonically. Well, let me see. There was Saigon, Tokyo. Bill tried to smile. Okay, so there were a couple of times. It didn't inhibit you then. Let's just get on with it. Meanwhile, I'm going fishing. Clint hit Maya Marina about 10 o'clock. He found where the commercial captains kept their for-hire boats for those who wanted to try their luck at deep-sea fishing. After he talked to 2 or 3, he finally selected an old salt who couldn't care less whether Clint hired him or not. Don't need the money, just like to fish, was his statement when Clint asked about hire. They gently pulled away from the dock, and by the time they were in the middle of Biscayne Bay, heading for open waters, Clint was happy with his choice. The man had a gentle hand on the wheel, controlled the 35-foot Hatteras with ease, and read the currents like a 15-year-old sneaking a look at Daddy's Playboy magazine. He made the best time without all the hoopla the other captains seemed to like. When he was free of the bay, the captain set the autopilot and went aft to the fishing seats, where Clint relaxed in the sun. He pulled 6 rods from their holders, set the jigs, and baited the long-leadered hooks with small mackerel. Sailfish are running right now, and they like mackerel. We'll troll for an hour or so and see if we can stir up a little fun. They'd been trolling the 6 lines for the best part of the specified hour, just shooting the breeze, swapping stories about wars and women, when one of the lines went taut and began to sing. The captain strapped Clint in the fishing seat and handed him the pole. Just let him run about a minute, clamp down on the reel with that thumb guard, hold it for 10 seconds, and let her run again. As Clint followed the directions, the captain pulled the other 5 rods, stowed them neatly in their brackets, and returned to Clint. For the next 3 hours the battle raged. Clint spent time pulling, reeling in, letting go, repeating the maneuvers as the captain directed. Clint's arms and back felt as if he had been in a marathon kickboxing match. At long last they pulled the spent sailfish nearer the boat. As Clint hauled the fish close in, tugging the line with his gloved hand, the captain leaned over the side and gaffed the beauty. "Y'all want to go for two?" questioned the captain. "No, thank you," replied Clint. "Paid for the whole day. We got 4 or 5 hours left." "I paid to catch a fish. We got one. I'm done." "Guess I'll have to show you some of the sights, then. Don't return money. It's against my principles," the captain growled as he tidied up the deck area. He retrieved a couple of cokes, and the two men went up to the flying bridge. They cruised for 2 more hours, and the captain set a course for the dock. As Clint stepped ashore, a crowd appeared. "Hey, that's some catch!" yelled someone. "Give you a good fight?" asked another. There were more remarks as Clint and the captain hauled the sailfish off the boat and onto the dock, where they strung it up by the tail. It was true, it was a hell of a catch, and Clint was proud of his effort. "Well, Captain, I'll be seeing you, and thanks, I had a great time." "What y'all gonna do with the catch?" "Oh, he's yours. Do with it as you wish," waved Clint, heading for the jeep. It was almost 5 o'clock, and Clint knew that with rush-hour traffic he would never be back to Marguerite's by 6. As he had expected, the drive was one pain in the ass, the bumper-to-bumper traffic wending its way along the shore route, through Coconut Grove and then down Old Cutler Road, reminded Clint of the Los Angeles freeways. He finally just sat back and enjoyed the scenery. It was almost 7 by the time he got to his destination. Marguerite was out in front of the house, washing her Mustang. "Thought I would do something instructive while you took a pleasant drive down from the city." A light went on in Clint's brain, but he couldn't tell why. "Dad has taken off with his cronies for the weekend. They decided a little fishing down in the Keys was what the doctor ordered." "Oh, is your dad sick?" Marguerite threw back her head and laughed. "2 of his fishing buddies are doctors. That's all the excuse they need to use that old chestnut." "I could use another shower and some clean clothes. I've been out fishing also." "Where's your catch?" "I gave it to the captain. Yeah, but here's proof." He pulled a Polaroid from his shirt pocket. "Wait a minute. What do you mean, another shower?" "Oh, your dad invited me in this morning when I came for the jeep. You underestimate him." "Let's go in. You grab your shower downstairs. I'll get mine up. Is there anything special you'd like for dinner?" "I don't know the restaurants around here. Why don't you choose?" "We're not going out to dinner. We'll eat in. On second thought, why don't we take our shower together?" He raced her up the stairs, but the shower would have to wait. It was much later, in the family room downstairs in front of the fire. Clint was scrunched into the soft, supple, brown leather sofa. The only sound was the crackling fire and the crunching of potato chips, until Marguerite spoke. "You are a strange person. You never talk about yourself." "Not much to say. Just an average joker who pushes a rig for a living." "I would say a little better than average. That's no average rig you're pushing. A twin of your brother's?" "How'd you know the other driver was my brother?" "I heard you say so." "I never said any such thing." "Oh, I guess my brains are still back in your truck. Remember where I got your phone number? I asked him who he was then." Clint wondered about that. He remembered that Marguerite had called him on his cellular. That was how he knew who to follow when they left the dock. What bothered him now was why. She slipped into his arms, and they slid down onto the white sheepskin rug. The fire was just embers when they separated for the 3rd time in as many hours. Clint lay on his back, buck naked. He hadn't had any clothes on since before they had taken that long shower together. As he rolled over and lost himself in the glowing coals, his thoughts were ambivalent. She was a fine woman, good with sex, well-read, educated, and soft-spoken, but there were those little slips she made. Why did she bother to find out who he was, and why had she taken up with him? How did she know he was downtown? What was she really doing at that cabin last night? She sure didn't look like they had whacked her around. Oh well, it was an interlude, and a very pleasant one. She was really terrific in the sack. But he would have to be on his way first light if he wanted to meet Jeff in Orlando before noon. Marguerite had left the room and soon returned with a tray of cold lobster, clams on the half-shell, oysters, and some steamed mussels. "I understand that shellfish increases a man's virility," Clint smiled at her. "Eat up. I have plans for your body," she replied. "I'll be right back." As Clint was scoffing down the delicacies, Marguerite left the room. She returned in less than 5 minutes. "Where'd you go?" he questioned. "Little girl's room. You know, nature calls, and I had to answer." Clint knew she had lied. There'd been no flushing sound in this ultra-quiet house, and every time Marguerite told a lie, she averted her eyes. He knew there was something wrong. As he pulled himself up, trying to figure it out, he heard soft footsteps behind him. Before he could react, the cold steel of a gun muzzle pressed against his head. "Good evening, Mr. McCord," said the oily voice from behind the gun. So that's where Marguerite had gone, to let her Confederates in. Clint tried to rise, but a pair of iron-strong hands kept him in the seated position. "I feel kind of naked," he said. "You are naked," replied the voice, "and you shall remain so until you tell us what we wish to know, or you will die. Whatever comes first, your choice." Clint tried to turn his head to locate positions and numbers. All he received for his effort was a crack across the side of his head with a gun barrel. "I would appreciate some quick answers, and you may continue your shenanigans with your lady in peace." "Just a little joke, Mr. McCord." Clint was trying to figure how many there were and where they were located. "Could I just get out of this shitty position?" He was still sitting cross-legged on the floor with clamshells around him. His hands were on his knees. "The only other position you will assume, and possibly very shortly, is prone and dead. Now, Mr. McCord, what department of the police are you working for?" "I told you Three Stooges last night I am not, repeat, not employed by any police department in any manner, shape, or form." "I didn't say employed, did I? No, you are working for someone. That is quite different from being employed by them. As soon as I find out, I will be able to set plans on how to deal with them." Story continues on Tape 2, Side A. "Look, I told those three last night." "Yes, I am short 3 men this morning. You must understand I am upset about those 3. But they are dead because they were stupid. And, of course, lax. I cannot be accused of those failings. But to get you to understand my position, it was I who reported you to the police. It seems now that even with the warrant out for you, your contact in whatever department you are working for worked wonders in getting the heat off. The warrant was filed under case closed, and you are no longer a wanted man. All that is further proof of your worth to the agency you are working for. Now I want to know who they are, or I shall have you shot in exactly 1 minute. "Now you won't do that. If you really want that information, you're going to work me over till you get it." "You are a very bright man, sir. What you do not realize is that we are talking about a very large operation. I personally really do not care who you are working with, but my superiors don't want to go to the bother of revamping the entire route system for the product. We therefore want to know who, and then we will know how. Police are so stupid. Their minds work in a pattern, never varying from the previous operation. If you do not tell me what I require, you are a dead man. We will pick up our marbles and leave Miami." "I don't think so. You're running out of time." "We will make the time, sir," answered the interrogator. "I can't tell you something I don't know." "Is that so? Well, who was that fine gentleman you met with this morning? Santa Claus? He is supposedly increasing your protection?" "What are you talking about?"
Please don't underestimate my intelligence. This morning when you placed those calls, how do you think we managed to tap that telephone?
"Tap what phone?"
The one you spoke to your brother on. It was a payphone. Correct. The moment you asked for change, 4 men took to the adjoining phones and tied them up. The only phone left was the one you used. Ergo, tapped. You spoke to your brother first, and to Bill second. I am sure it was Bill that showed up at the truck stop because he was the one who said he would see you in less than half an hour. We know he is not local because we pay half of the locals and we know the rest.
Okay, wise ass, if you tapped the phone, you should know who I called. Clint was testing the waters. If they really knew and were just testing him, he had to plan a different strategy.
We could only install a simple tap in the time we had. We could not ascertain calling numbers. We could only eavesdrop.
While this discussion was going on, Clint was using his peripheral vision as best he could. He had to find out if there was a chance to force a fight. He could see Marguerite off to one side against the wall, but just standing there. There was no restraint on her, no one near her. His feelings were really hurt. He had been led astray. He had let his judgment go stagnant while he satisfied his biological urge. How's chances of getting out of this position? His knees were stiffening, and he could not feel his toes. He had to do something fast.
So that you can repeat last night's performance, huh? Not a chance. You sit there.
He gestured with a gun,
butt and hands on the floor.
Desperate thoughts flooded Clint's mind. He believed the man would just as casually shoot him as flick a cigarette butt out a window. Could he pull off a sitting handstand and flip quickly enough to disarm them? How many were there, anyway? He counted 1 talking behind him, another whispering voice, maybe 2 near the door, and Marguerite, now an open enemy. At least 3. A sudden move could be next to impossible if any one of them had a gun ready. Surprise. I have to surprise them. It's my only weapon, and I have to use it precisely and fast, he thought desperately. He twisted around and got a sharp kick in the ribs for his effort.
Now that you have had time to assess your predicament, how about some names and places, Mr. McCord?
Humiliated, Clint's blood pounded furiously in his head. He would be damned if he were going to sit there quietly and let them kill him without a fight. First anger, then an adrenaline rush. His head pulsed with the design of his next move. He tried to grab another look, but the gun whacked against the side of his head. It was now or never. If his adversary was close enough to hit him, he could be had. With a superhuman effort, he thrust his hands down in front of him on the floor, lifted his body off the floor in the same motion. He brought his legs backwards for the mule kick, and then under his body into a handstand, vaulting and twisting towards the man. As he rotated in the air, he eyed the other gunman. Good. Only one. His feet caught the neck of the pistol whipper, and Clint felt the windpipe snap. Marguerite stood, frozen, while the man by the door stood, mouth agape, unable to react. Clint landed in a crouch and then started for him. Suddenly jarred into action, the man aimed his pistol when 3 reports fired into the creep's body. Blood spurted rhythmically from his mouth as the dead man sank to the ground. "You make one hell of a sight," said Bill Clark as he stepped into the room. "Quite a scene. You naked, flipping through the air, and her standing there smiling like she was at some la-di-da tea party." "You think the smile was from the last 2 days, or from thinking of what was to come?" laughed Clint. "Go get some clothes on. I'm not at all impressed," replied Bill. "And handcuff Mona Lisa there so we can get down to business." A short time later, Bill and Clint were jawing in a Cuban restaurant on 8th Street. "The guy who won't be using his windpipe anymore was Luis Vasquez. He's about 3 steps up the ladder over the hood that died in the house. We picked him up on a possession charge and have him in a very private retreat out of action. We can't connect him to anyone higher up yet. Marguerite was rerouting the dope through the docks. She had a scanner on that little go-kart, and her contacts were tipped off before you unloaded the 4th pallet. Evidently, she was told to stay close to see if you knew anything. So that's why she changed her mind after she turned me down flat. That punctures my balloon. That little sojourn in the Coconut Grove restaurant was supposed to be your last stop. Like so many other murders here in Miami, it would go unsolved, too.
Well, how come you guys were right there when I needed you now? Questioned Clint.
I told you we'd be on your tail every minute.
So what happened the night before?
We lost a man. He was right there with you, but they spotted him. We found his body floating under the dock at the Miami Marina.
Sorry, Bill. It's a shitty world today.
Listen, Clint, these people are the scum of the earth, and a life, yours or anybody's, means nothing to them. They kill like you order coffee. There is no judge and jury in their lives.
Well, where are we now? Is the whole scene blown, with them dead?
No, not really. Our good-looking redhead is babbling like a banshee. She wants to cooperate in return for a promise of no hard time. I think we'll swap her a jail sentence for the rest of these bums.
Can you trust her?
You never know, Clint. She agreed to have a transplant, courtesy of our department in the feds.
Transplant?
Yeah, a wire. We plant this baby under her skin, and it's undetectable. We're going to turn her loose. It's still soon enough that they may swallow the story that she got away when you took out the two guys. She only has a telephone number, but we're hopeful it'll smoke 'em out.
Where is Marguerite?
At a private clinic 3 blocks from here, having some minor surgery. She'll be ready to make that call in an hour. The timing is good, and we may get real lucky with this lady.
All at once, Clint leaned into Bill's face, scared even to say the name. Jeff. What about Jeff? They knew I talked to him.
Jeff's fine. We talked to him, personally. He knows you're all right, but that's all he knows. For now, it's best we keep him out of it.
I thought you said this was going to be a quick drop and we're off the hook.
Sorry, Clint. We had 20 men on this case. We had the known suspects covered as well as you, with tails all over the place. These people are rich as gods. They're spread out everywhere. We know 20 cops who are sending money offshore for their retirement nest egg, but we can't prove it in court. There's probably some judges who are moonlighting for the bad guys anyway.
Wearily, he shook his head.
It's tough being a good guy.
He dipped his finger in the water ring and drew squiggly lines on the table for a few minutes. Clint sat quietly, watching him, until Bill continued,
We don't know about Marguerite, and we still have a few fat rats to unearth. I hate to ask, Clint, but are you still in?
Right up to the end.
Good. The government and I appreciate your patriotism and your guts.
My pleasure. And you owe dinner.
Oh, by the way, that was some backflip. About 9.9, with 1/10 of a point off for nudity.
Chapter 6. Clint and Bill waited in the FBI office until Marguerite appeared. She looked a little pale, but was smiling.
How is it? You okay?
Asked Bill. I'm fine. They used a topical Novocaine, and the whole thing took only half an hour. It feels strange, but the doctor said I wouldn't notice it within a couple of hours. Bill reached into his drawer and pulled out a small piece of plastic, as big around as the top of an eraser on a pencil, and just slightly thicker than a postcard. He passed it over to Clint, who took it on the tip of his finger.
This is what they implanted? Looks almost like a contact lens. Yeah, want to hear it work?
Bill motioned Marguerite into the outer office, where his secretary watched her. He pulled out an old Zippo lighter, flipped open the top, and Marguerite's voice came over the lighter as plain as if she were in the room.
Yeah, the biggest problem is range. We can hear well at 200 yards, but at 500 we get mostly garble. We want to implant you also.
No problem. Between the beepers and these, we're covered.
Well, there's a small problem with the beepers. Seems one of our technicians sold the frequencies to our friends.
I suppose that gentleman is now on vacation?
He decided he didn't want to go to jail. We found him in his garage when we went for him. Carbon monoxide.
Another informant tip-off? Asked Clint.
That's what we have to assume. We found out, and we were at his house within the hour.
Clint grimaced. It's getting to be a question of how fast we can kill or be killed. Marguerite ambled smugly into the office and sat on the edge of the desk. She grinned seductively at Clint, but when he ignored her, She dialed the number to reach Louise in case of emergency. Bill turned on the electronic gear as she dialed. The equipment would automatically post the called number on a screen, tape any conversation, and trace additional numbers if call forwarding was being used. The number rang 4 times, and a message came on. This line has been temporarily disconnected. Calls are being taken by 736-5000. And the machine disconnected. The switching gear took over, traced the call forwarded to the new number and its address. Again, there was an operator intercept saying the line had been disconnected with no forwarding number. To wait for Vasquez to contact Marguerite, she was sent home, and Clint went for his implant. I feel like a walking communication center. He held out his arm for inspection when he returned to the office. We just monitored a call to Marguerite. They wanted to know what happened, but wouldn't talk on her phone. They set a meet for the fountain at the Dadeland Mall on Kendall Drive, 1 hour. We'll have her covered like a blanket, and with that implant, we got it made. It was 1 hour later, at the assigned fountain, when Marguerite was met by an elderly lady who could have been her mother. Bill and Clint heard the woman throw her arms around Marguerite and murmur, "Play it cool. Walk along with me." The two strolled down the center of the mall, looking at shop windows, chatting comfortably. The woman directed Marguerite into a jeans shop, one of many in the mall. They went in, a female agent right on their trail. Another agent raced around the back to the service alley that ran behind the shops, catching them getting into a red Jaguar. He called a pursuit vehicle and took off after them. The Jag made countless turns, cutbacks, stops, and reverses. The pursuers used 4 nondescript cars and trucks. When the culprits made a turn, the first chase car continued on without following, so another car could take over. This parade went on for almost an hour. Clint and Bill followed the chase through coded signals over 4 different bands. Just in case the dopers were using police band monitors, ultra-high frequencies were used, changed and scrambled after every message. The cops were taking no chances on losing them this time. Finally, when patience was stretching as thin as tired bubblegum, the dopers, with Marguerite in tow, pulled into a drive-in up in North Miami Beach. The car was silent until the car hop brought their order. "Now, Marguerite, my darling, what went wrong?" "How the hell do I know? You set it all up. First you screw up that mess at the shack and 3 men are dead. Then that fiasco at my place and we have 2 more dead. 1 bled all over my carpet. Some organization. Can't you get it straight? I've had to spend 2 days in a lousy camper bed with some trucker. You guys really piss me off." Her voice was one that Clint had not heard before. It was flat and venomous. "That's really not the right attitude, Marguerite." "Oh, shut up and let's get down to business. If you guys blow this setup, I'm out $10,000 a month. I've gotten used to that kind of bread." The wire picked up the conversation as if they were in the same room, even though the message was relayed over satellite to the receiver Clint and Bill were listening to. "Where are we now?" questioned the original male voice. Another voice spoke for the first time. "We now know the trucker is connected to the police. We should leave the whole thing and set up shop through our alternate." "Sure," snapped Marguerite. "I spent a year refining your operation, and you're going to throw the damn thing out like yesterday's garbage." "We paid you for a year before you produced 1 lick of information." "Hold on, that was your fault. I was ready, you weren't." The first voice broke in. "Stop this bickering. It will be best to continue along the present setup. Our shipments aren't in Miami 24 hours before they are back on the distribution route. I don't want to disrupt our schedule. Well, now the problem is we don't know how close they are, and this Clint McCord is becoming a real liability." "Kill him," came in a third voice. "That may be the solution. With him out of the way, their plan will be interrupted, and we'll have time to make use of our police horse to muddy up their waters." "I vote for killing McCord." "Nobody said this was a voting issue. I will contact the decision-maker today. We will all meet at Luis's place tonight at 9. "What about Marguerite? Kill her too?" asked another voice. "Not now. You will be useful, my dear, with McCord when we terminate him. For now, dear lady, we are through with you. Leave. But remember, we are watching you." The car door opened and closed,
and the agents could hear footsteps as she walked away. The footsteps stopped for a moment, and Marguerite shouted, "Kendall Mall? You guys listening on my wire? I hope you get the bastards and kill them." "She's taking a cab," said Bill, speaking tersely into his radio. The chasers were back on the trail of Marguerite. "You want us to continue surveillance of the other car?" came the query from the radio. "Affirmative," responded Bill. The cab finally reached Dadeland, and Marguerite ordered, "Driver, my car is just down there a little bit on the left." Once inside her car, Marguerite sang into her implant, "Okay, fellas, I'm going home. I think it'll be all right." She was relieved to pull her car in her driveway of heavy ficus and palmetto scrub. Clint was waiting over near the small grove of trees. She joined him there, and they walked further into the darkness of the growth until Clint felt they could talk. "I think I could have killed you when I first discovered you were using me," he spoke softly, aware of their transmitters. "I was using you at first. Then I wished I could be someone else." She came closer and snuggled into his arms. She was shaking. "You came real close to saying bye-bye a little while ago. I'm not sure they still don't plan on getting rid of me, but it's for sure that you're on their list. Will anyone protect me, Clint?" "We'll just have to see about that." He laughed and tweaked her breast. "You're in grave danger, you know. From me." "Clint, I'm not just doing this to get out of trouble. I care a lot for you. It wasn't supposed to happen between us, but if we get out of this, how about the two of us going away somewhere for a while?" "You're on." He pulled her tightly to him, and they kissed, desperately and fully. Reluctantly, she left his arms, and Clint watched her receding shadow cross from the clump of trees to the house. He was so intently watching her that he never heard the slight rustle of palm fronds just before the muzzle of a gun pressed to his neck just below the jawline. "Do not make a sound. Move quietly to the rear of the garage." Clint turned towards the garage and cursed himself for his carelessness. Guided by the pressure of the muzzle, Clint moved to the side of the garage that gave them a view of the house but shadowed them. "I'm going to remove the revolver. You remain steady and quiet." The cold steel left his neck, and a woman stepped into the dim light of the moon. She looked so familiar. "Do I know you? Do you work with Bill?" Clint asked. "For Bill. I'm Sally Gomez, actually Detective Sergeant Gomez, Florida State Police." She stuck out her hand. "That's Shapiro, who used his gun. Sorry about intruding on your romance, but my orders are in sight at all times. I had to watch." "You people don't trust her, do you?" "Not completely, Mr. McCord. Far more than we did yesterday, but not completely. You never know with people. Some enticement, like her life, may turn her against us, and then you'd have a problem." "Are you here to watch her?" asked Clint. "Both of you. There is another agent on the far side of the house, and one waiting for you to leave, if you leave." "What's the scenario from now on?" "We cannot close in yet. We have known about this bunch for some time, but we have to get farther up the ladder. There is someone here in Miami who's calling the shots, possibly for the whole country. We need that person if we are to sever the total conduit." "So now they want to off me." "It started by just wanting to know how you were connected, but when you did 3 of their people in that shack, it became a personal vendetta. They could not let you get by with that," said Gomez. "But Marguerite was part of it. She picked up on the transponders and let them know, set me up." "They have to know who you're connected to. You know they have a payroll in the law enforcement agencies that are tracking for them. They know who they are, but they don't know who else is onto them and who can't be bought. If they squeeze you enough, they will have enough information to erase some lines and bolster others." "How big is the operation?" questioned Clint. "Big? How big, nobody knows. We think they're importing at least $5 billion of poison a year, but it may go many times larger than that. As Bill told you, when their previous avenues dried up because we closed them, they went this route." "So, now what?" Clint leaned against the big rider mower and watched the lights in the house. "Bill wants to know if you are still in. "I already told him I was," said Clint. "Same plan as Nam when we extracted 6 of our own." He remembered well the incident, but that rescue mission almost went sour. The Kong had 6 of our guys in a small outpost, waiting to move them farther inside the jungle to a prison camp. Our whole outfit was going to get them out before the move took place, but someone with a fat mouth blew the operation, and 12 men were lost that night. Rather than abandon them, Bill and I loaded enough firepower on our backs to finish the whole damn war and went back in alone. We crawled through the drainage ditch that carried the effluents from the camp and came up shooting. He paused and smiled grimly. We got all 6 men out and wiped out a bunch of gooks. We did the job we went for, period. Impressive, she thought. Then out loud she said, "So that's how Bill got you for this job?" "He asked me to do him a favor. I don't work for him." "So what now?" asked Clint. "We have 2 people on Marguerite, 2 on you. Where are you sleeping tonight?" "I was thinking of a motel." She grinned. "It would be easier if you stayed in the truck. We would have you both on the same property, and there would be 4 of us watching." "What a good idea. You'll find me in my truck." Chapter 7. Clint awoke, fuzzy-headed. Something was irritating him, pulling him out of his fog. He shook his head for the 3rd time before he realized it was the phone, and that he was alone. "Yeah," he grumbled into the mouthpiece. "Bad night, big brother?" Jeff's cheerful voice irritated Clint. "You ought to slow down. You're not getting any younger." "Shut up, wise guy." "You okay?" questioned Clint. "Why shouldn't I be?" "We've had a little excitement in the last 36 hours. What are you doing?" "I just fueled the rig. Gas was the same price as it was in Tampa, so I figured I'm that much ahead, price-wise." "Listen, I'm going to be tied up for another day. You take off for the West Coast, and after you unload, hang out before taking another load. My destination is the same as yours, so I'll be in L.A. 1 day later than you." "Well, I can wait here for you." "I really would prefer that you take off. If I can't make it to L.A. on time, I'll give you a shout and you can pick up your next load." "Well, that's fine with me, but I'd rather make the haul with you." "Hey, you're a big boy. I think it's best if you go." Trying to get Jeff out of this Florida mess was not as easy as he had hoped. Unexpectedly, Jeff agreed. Yeah. Okay, Clint, see ya." Jeff hung up the receiver of the payphone. The man standing next to him prodded him again with the muzzle of his gun and motioned him out the door. Clint shaved and put on clean jeans and a T-shirt that said 40 and loving it. He rummaged around in the fridge for a snack. As he pulled the rest of a quart of milk from the box, there was a knock at the cab door. Marguerite sang out, "Breakfast is ready. In the house." It took Clint a few minutes to secure the cab and lock the door. He walked to the house front door, where Marguerite waited for him. "What's wrong?" Clint asked as he read her face. "They've got your brother." "You're nuts. I just talked to him. He's fine." Sally Gomez came into the room. "All's clear out there. We did a sweep, and they don't have anyone anywhere near here. We even sent a copter over, and all is clean." "Sally," said Clint, "do they know that Marguerite is with us?" "We don't know. What we do know is that they haven't been near here all night. My guess is they don't trust her, but they don't have her under watch." "I'm getting the rig out of here. I'll call you after I park it, but you'd better ask Marguerite what she just told me." He strode through the door, chin jutting, mouth drawn in a slash like a dark scar. Clint fired up the diesel, checked the pressures, and backed out of the slot into the driveway. He dropped the trans in low range and shifted into first. Once on 144th Street, he headed for US 1 and pulled into a Walmart that had payphones. First, he called Bill to ask about Jeff. No answers satisfied him, so Bill directed him to a truck stop where he would meet him for coffee. He found a space way in the back and hid the tractor in the maze of rigs, trailers, and straight jobs. Clint was an old campaigner, but inside he was seething. In that state of mind, it was poor philosophy to make rash judgments and take irresponsible actions. He was not in the booth 10 minutes when Bill slid in the seat opposite. "Clint, I don't know what's happened," he began. "We checked. He's not in or near the truck.
The lot where he parked his truck in Kissimmee said they hadn't seen him since some babe picked him up in a convertible this morning. I don't know if they really have him or he's shacking up with some broad somewhere.
What the hell happened to your tail on him?
Well, we asked the same question. The agent didn't make his last hour check. That means they could have Jeff for as much as 4 hours.
How so?
Our men check in every 3 hours. Sooner if there's trouble, but when we don't hear for 3 hours, we assume there's not a problem.
This assumption may cost us dearly.
Clint, what's bothering me is how did Marguerite know they had Jeff? Did we lose her loyalty back to them, or was she always with them and using us to get to Jeff and you?
Well, they had me this morning, if that was the case. I was in the rig all night. She knocked on the door this morning, told me breakfast was ready.
Didn't you sleep with her last night? You know, in the house?
Sally Gomez said it'd be a good idea if I...
Who the hell's Sally Gomez?
They both were through the restaurant and into the car, racing out of the drive before the doors were closed. They screeched into Marguerite's yard, slid to a stop in front of the door. Marguerite was spread-eagled on the great room floor. Her hands had been lashed to 2 steel andirons in the fireplace. Her feet were spread and tied with leather thongs to the sofa and the overstuffed chair opposite. On her chest was a piece of paper with the words, "Death to Traitors," impaled by a large Spanish sword wrenched from a display on the wall.
"I killed her," choked Clint, as he knelt beside her.
He could feel gorge rising from his stomach. The sour acid taste burned the back of his mouth. Bill watched his friend for a moment, then moved into the kitchen to leave him alone. When he returned, Clint was standing over her. He had covered her with a serape taken from the sofa.
"Clint,
A sharp look from Clint stopped Bill's futile words.
This Sally, whatever, is another new player. Pretty smart. With one move, they kept you in place, nailed her, and got your brother."
"Yeah. While I lay on my ass snoring."
"Now don't start that shit."
The consequences of Margaret's murder dawned on Bill as he called out, running,
"My God, I still have 2 men out there."
Circling the garage, they found no one, but spotted at the same time the grove of scrub trees where Clint and Marguerite had kissed the night before. Carefully, they pushed the bushes apart. They didn't have to go far. Both agents had been lashed to opposite sides of a ficus tree. Their throats were slashed. It had been a bloody 3 days. Bill took his cellular from his pocket and made another call.
"Why did they go to all that trouble last night?" questioned Clint. "They weren't ready. They had to get Jeff, and he was probably out on the town."
"So they set up this little play. What if I didn't believe this Gomez broad?"
"You'd be dead, too."
"Then why did they keep me alive? They have what they want. For now their shipment is safe. I'd be dead, Marguerite would be dead, and you'd be at loose ends."
"Well, they still can't figure you. If they knew where you were connected, besides to me, they could plan. They have to find out how far up their chain has been discovered, whether they have to pull up stakes or just repair some local damage."
"Well, then why haven't you been eliminated?"
"For the same reason we don't nail the ones we already know about. See, it's a big game we play. Both sides are trying to destroy the other's entire operation, not just get rid of a few of the small pieces. There's big stakes, Clint. Outside of the billions of dollars involved here, we're talking unknown numbers of people. Human beings who will become addicts, ruin lives, to say nothing of those who will die from this pestilence. Drugs, it's more than casualties of war. It's our whole fabric of life being destroyed."
His voice quaked as he wiped the edges of his eyes. He could not look at his agents, slumped dead against the tree. Clint's arms were wrapped tightly against himself. "But you've got to have a plan. Somebody's got to have a plan to stop this. I'm a full-time player, Bill. You can tell me."
"If there is, I don't know it. All I do is keep fighting these skirmishes."
He stuck his handkerchief back in his pocket.
"Sorry about that. I need to blow off some steam sometimes. Look, here's the way I see it. First, we get your rig out of that truck stop. I'll have the team put it in a safe place. Now, that'll do 2 things. We know they're watching us. By moving your truck, they may think we're deeper into them than we really are."
"You're jeopardizing Jeff's life."
Jeff's life is already hanging by a thread. If they have him, we gotta find him and get him out.
Well, that means we're on our way to Orlando.
The chopper's in the parking lot of the truck stop.
Not too obvious, Bill. Clint couldn't resist teasing his friend's flair for drama.
We're going back to the truck stop. We'll have a cup of coffee, and as we go out, a guy is going to bump into you. Now, you shove him back, but don't make it into a big deal. Just keep on going.
As planned, after their coffee, the two men paid their bill and headed for the door. As Clint reached to push the door open, a burly behemoth of a man came through the opening and knocked him to one side. Clint shoved back and walked through the door to the parking lot.
Where do you get these types? Same place we recruited you. There are a hell lot of truck drivers that love their country and aren't afraid to fight for it. That little guy's known around here. He's been hauling for years.
Well, why did he push me? I still got the key. Oh, he got them. Pretty slick. When the chopper pilot saw them coming, he fired up the rotors. When Clint and Bill strapped themselves in, it took off in a whirling flurry of dirt and stones, leaving more than one trucker shaking his fist at the rising machine. Watching the commotion, Bill smiled without humor and said,
"Once we're sure they're trying to catch us and leave the truck stop alone, we'll move the rig."
"Why wait?"
We don't want our buddy identified just now. He'll pass keys to someone else who'll move your rig while he's still at the counter."
"How many did they have there?" "I think I counted 3.
Right on the button."
"We had only 2. What if it turned into a fight?"
"Well, we had those 2 you spotted and the other 2.
"What other 2? Clint asked.
"Us."
The chopper did a 2-hour bump-and-grind flight to the small airport on Route 441 at Zellwood. When it sat down, a car was waiting to take them to an anonymous motel near the center of Apopka. After registering, they went toward their rooms, but then headed instead through the vending machine alleyway, circled the building, slid into another waiting car, and sped off toward Orlando down 441. When they hit Lee Road, they made a left at Ben White Racetrack and pulled into the Holiday House parking lot. Switching cars again, they took off towards Colonial Drive and its domino row of car dealers. The Mercury, the Chevy, the Jeep dealers all recognized them as lookers and left them alone. Finally, at a used car lot, they entered a trailer office with a salesman. He left, and Bill reached under the desk, pushed a button, and the side wall slid open like a roll-top desk. They entered another office, waited for the concealing wall to go back in place, and then they dropped down, exhausted.
"Cup of coffee, Clint? I know you don't drink, but I'm going to have a bud."
"Coffee's fine, Bill. That was the wildest, damnedest ride I've ever had. I want some armament for the next adventure."
"Well, open that closet."
He took a long drag from the can.
"Take your pick, as much ammo as you think we'll need."
Clint opened the closet, and then the pair of steel doors behind. He stepped back and whistled.
"For the war?"
"Yep." He burped as the beer hit bottom and bounced back up.
"I hope some of that'll save Jeff's neck."
Clint surveyed the armory, finally choosing a .44 Magnum and a .38 snub-nosed. He touched the Bowie knives and rifles respectfully. "Feel like a kid in a candy store," he said, strapping the .44 into a shoulder holster. He lifted his right leg, pulled up his jeans, and attached a leg holster to his ankle, then slipped the .38 in tightly.
"Ready, Rambo?"
asked Bill.
"I don't know about ready, Bill, but I'm prepared."
"Let's go get my baby brother."
"Just a minute, partner," responded Bill, walking to a metal wardrobe by the door. "Grab a new outfit to cover that arsenal."
Bill slipped on a Universal Studios baseball jacket and cap, while Clint found a Houston Oilers jacket and a Cowboys cap.
"Can't be partial," he smiled. "Got to get all of Texas covered."
Chapter 8. It was almost an hour later when Clint and Bill walked into the office of the local federal DEA. One man sat at a plain oak desk, like the one schoolteachers used to have. Papers were piled in neat stacks, and ballpoint pens lay in even rows before him.
"Clint McCord, Jack McCandless." "Glad to meet you. You're Jeff's brother."
"Yeah."
"Sorry about losing him. We had him tailed."
McCandless rearranged the rows of ballpoint pens, all blacks, all reds, then mixed them together as he talked.
2 men around the clock.
Met this little Georgia peach and was hanging out with her for 3 days. Our men got a little jumpy when there's no movement early this morning, so we went in. Only thing left was a note tacked to the cabinet with a knife. Now the pens were lined up end to end. "Well, what did the note say?" asked Clint, his eyes fascinated by the pen work. "See ya. Just see ya." "Great," said Bill. "Where are your men so we can question them?" "That's the rest of the story. Evidently the place was not empty like they thought because—" He angrily swept the pens onto the floor. "Both of my men got nailed. One shot dead at the scene, the other's being moved from ICU right now at Florida Hospital. Docs say he'll make it." Clint stared at the pens scattered on the tile floor. Bill's voice jostled him back. "Is he available for questioning?" "I called about 5 minutes ago. Our man on guard says he's out of the anesthesia. The time we get there, he should be able to fill us in." A red brick and glass skyscraper, the Florida Hospital fills a couple of blocks on Orange Avenue. McCandless knew his way through it, taking them directly to a small freight elevator, then to the 3rd floor where they padded silently to the wounded agent's room. There was no agent on guard. Puzzled, McCandless knocked twice. No answer. The 3 raised eyebrows in question. McCandless knocked twice more. When there was no response, he turned the handle, and cautiously, with guns drawn, they entered the room. The wounded man lay on the bed, his nose full of plastic tubes running to an oxygen source on the wall, others from his wrists to an IV, and wires attached to heart monitors. An agent, perched on the windowsill, faced them. He lowered the magazine he held, revealing a large-bore handgun aimed directly at them. Everyone lowered their guns, smiled sheepishly, and a collective sigh filled the room. Holstering his gun, the agent nodded, touched the wounded man's shoulder, and left the room. McCandless pressed the call button, and 2 minutes later the doctor bustled in. "Hey, Will, how's Mary?" McCandless asked the doctor. "She's fine, Jack, but I can't say as much for your young fellow here. We had him under the knife for 5 hours. His vitals are okay, but it'll be a while before he's out in the streets again." "We're in time trouble. Whoever shot him has an important hostage. We need to talk to Fred here." "Well, he's still kind of groggy. I don't know if you can trust his answers." "Will it hurt him if we question him?" asked Jack. "I'll stay and watch the vitals. If he's in trouble, we'll call it off." "Fair enough," replied McCandless, and went to the side of the bed. The doctor walked around the bed to monitor the machines, and McCandless began. "Fred, McCandless here. Can you hear me?" Fred opened his eyes and smiled weakly. "I'm okay, Coach. Send me back in." Jack smiled. "Oh, that's great, just great. Now, what can you tell us, kid?" "Well, first off, we got a little jumpy when there were no lights or movement this morning. They've been getting up early, hitting the parks or the beaches, but on the go from morning till night. Last night they got in at midnight. Lights were out at 12:15. The noise settled down about 2 a.m. He began to cough, and the doctor glanced at McCandless to warn him to be quick, but Fred picked up his story. "At 6, when there was no movement, we got a little edgy. Larry, my partner, Larry—" "I'm sorry," said Jack. He watched Fred's face contort in pain and anger like 2 dark colors writhing in oil. "Oh, shit. We worked together for 3 years. Hold off. I need a minute." Jack shot the doctor a questioning glance. He nodded, and Fred went on. Okay, I'm set. I went for the front door. Larry went around back. We waited the customary 20 count. We both went in. There's gunfire out back first, and I started down the hall. The first one hit me way off target. I got around off through the door, heard a grunt. "Yeah, we know others were hit. There's blood all over the other side of the door where we found you. Your winging him is what saved your life. They needed to get Jeff and the girl out, and now they also had one wounded. They didn't have time to check on you. Only
thing I heard before I went out was, we better get him to the park. That was all.
Fred's coughing increased. The heart machine's peaks and valleys fluctuated higher and closer.
Time for a nap, Fred. Jack, you're finished.
The doctor walked around the end of the bed, waiting to escort the men from the room. McCandless paused. You did good, Fred. This'll give us a start. He reached across the bed, took Fred's hand, and squeezed it. All you have to do is relax and get well. I'll probably see you at the donut shop Friday.
As they got into the car, Clint sighed.
Yeah, I know, said Jack. Like there's only one park in this town. Seems there's a new one opening up every week, and we're not including trailer parks or just plain parks.
McCandless continued.
But we do have 12 major parks when you count Epcot, Magic Kingdom, and MGM Studios as 3 separate places.
So where do we start? Clint asked.
First, we have to get a picture of Jeff.
Well, I got one in the cab. Shit, the cab is 450 miles from here.
Not, Bill grinned. Your truck is just south of Kissimmee. Brought it up here to save time. Your driver's a guy you know.
I don't know any drivers in Miami.
Well, this one almost knocked you over a few hours ago, said Bill.
All right, crowed Clint. There's a good picture of Jeff in the cab. We had it taken for his license, so it's recent.
We'll have the lab blow up Jeff's picture, make prints, distribute them, and get them to our people within the hour.
But we don't have a clue as to what those guys look like that are holding him.
Wrong. Since Jeff got out of his truck, we have snapped pictures of everyone that's come anywhere near him. The crew has been comparing all the shots, looking for repetition of faces.
Well, then you should have a good picture of Jeff also.
We have shots of him, and could probably use them, but as long as the truck is almost in town, we'll see if your picture can do a better job.
He picked up his cellular and ordered an agent to retrieve Jeff's license picture from Clint's rig. 20 minutes later, McCandless pulled up to a photo shop. Bill and Clint stayed in the car. McCandless picked up a manila folder and came back to the car as fast as his portly frame allowed. He waddled like a mallard crossing a highway on foot. Bill and Clint began to leaf through the stack of pictures, separating any that showed someone standing next to Jeff.
Looks like there are some 7 faces that are near Jeff in these shots.
Bill asked,
That's not a regular Photoshop, is it?
Looks like one, doesn't it?
No, the shop is really a front. We have the labs in the back, but the big operation is downtown just off Church Street.
I suppose that one's a candy store?
No, it actually looks like a Salvation Army drop. By the time we get back to the office, the prints will be ready for distribution. We did 2 things. We'll make a composite of the license picture of Jeff, our snaps, and any other mug shots we may come across. We have enough different photos that no one could possibly miss Jeff if he shows.
Yeah, said Clint, if he shows. That is one big hell of an if.
Clint, said Jack, we have over 100 people on the street. We'll put 50 in Disney, Universal, and SeaWorld. We're checking the known drug runner haunts, and a team here is running all the comparative photos we took of those people that we saw with Jeff. Now, we are working real hard to get to your brother.
I know you are. Clint shook his head. It's just that these bastards kill at the drop of a hat.
We think that they'll keep Jeff alive to get at you. We know from 2 stoolies that they think you're connected real high. They want to know how high, and they want to know badly. It's extremely important to their future operation that they know who is onto them.
Well, who really is onto them? Asked Clint. This is a much bigger operation than the state police working with the locals in the Fed's bullpen.
Clint, this is strictly classified, and to keep you safe, we are not going to tell you any more than you know. They have ways of squeezing a person, and with the drugs that are in use today, you wouldn't last half-hour without spilling your guts.
Story continues on Tape 2, Side B.
Hey, I outlasted the Kong twice. Kid stuff, snorted McCandless. Pure kid stuff. Now, I'm not taking anything away from the torture that you withstood to keep them from making you do what they wanted, but that was physical. You're a tough hombre. Bill's told me how tough. But we're talking high-tech drugs. Believe me, you would have verbal diarrhea in no time.
But they haven't used them so far. And they weren't convinced that you were anything more than an errand boy. Well, that's all I am. Well, they don't know that. They think you have a wealth of information, and they are going to use your brother to get it from you. That's why we believe Jeff is alive and well. For now, said Clint. Chapter 9. The photo specialist came into McCandless's office with a stack of folders. He opened the first one, and there was a picture of Jeff, cropped from the original. The background had been airbrushed out to make Jeff's face the focal point. The next folder held a composite of 6 views of Jeff. They had been taken with 35mm cameras from many different angles while he was with Jenny. The next 10 folders showed snaps of 7 people in different locations. Finally, the finished composite had Jeff and his 7 friends on one glossy. Because Clint had never been in Orlando before, he could not recognize any of the backgrounds, but McCandless jumped right on them. Well, those 2 lovebirds really got around. Here they are at SeaWorld. Here's a shot of that new China place, and here's one at the Universal Studios theme park. Hey, here's another at Universal. And another. Seems to me they like that Universal lot. Or else our people just took a lot of pictures there. Bill thumbed through the stack. Now look at the times on the back. This batch was taken one day, these the next. Well, that means they returned there 2 days out of the 3 they spent together. Well, they must have really liked the place, said Clint. I don't think so, interjected McCandless. I make it that the girl was taking him there. What's the difference? Asked Clint. My guess is she's probably with him, steering him there so her people could bide their time and keep an eye on him. Yeah, that fits, said Bill. We may not have the time finding him we thought we had. Let's start with Universal Studios. We'll keep some people on the other places, and that includes Busch Gardens in Tampa, but Universal is primo. After giving instructions over the phone, McCandless directed Bill and Clint to the cafeteria. I'm not hungry, said Clint. Let's get on with it. The other 2 men smiled, and Bill grabbed Clint by the arm, dragging him along. You're going with us, but, and I repeat, but, only if you follow orders. Clint, this is big. You have to fit in, not stand out. Remember, Nam, the word is teamwork, Bill urged his friend. When they reached the cafeteria, they went directly to the kitchen and up to a walk-in cooler. Jack used a pass key, and they entered the door, walked past a pile of lettuce and vegetables to the rear of the cooler, where there was another door. Jack pulled that one open. Clint's mouth dropped. You could start World War III with this arsenal, he said as he looked around the interior of the Federal Agency arsenal. Here, number 1, flak jacket. No bullshit, put it on under the oilers outfit you got on. Then come over here, trade your ammunition for this assortment. We have armor-piercing, hollow points, poison-tipped, incendiaries, and a few mini-rockets for that 44 you're carrying under your arm. As Clint loaded up, a doctor came in and spread his kit on the table. Bill went first, and the doctor gave him 2 injections. As Jack was getting poked, Clint raised his eyebrows at Bill. These are antidotes. One is for the truth serum you may get, and the second is for a heroin shot. Yeah, I remember that one in Miami. How can people abuse their bodies like that? I felt like shit after. Well, this will counteract some of the effects, may even keep you ambulatory if you're injected. Do they work that well? I hope so. They're experimental. We used them once, and they were quite successful then, answered Jack. Jack's beeper went off. He went to a wall phone, spoke briefly, and hung up. Well, everyone's in the field except us. Let's go. The 3 men hurried back through the cafeteria and out into the rear parking lot. Why the cafeteria? Questioned Clint. Cafeteria is our nerve center. It's used not only for operational problems, but in case of hurricanes and other disturbances. Cafeteria is the best protected area we have in Orlando. The walls are 3 feet thick, and communications are state-of-the-art, some that the outside world hasn't even heard of yet. Of course, you've seen our arsenal, and we have 2 more command posts down there. We're pretty well self-sufficient in case of anything. When the president's in Central Florida, this is the safety target for him. We have an underground network of passageways, and there are modes of conveyance in and beyond those passageways. That's why the cafeteria.
They turned the car west toward Interstate 4, driving west for 10 minutes to Sand Lake Road, where they made a right to Universal Studios Florida theme park. From the administration building's parking lot, they walked to the guest relations office, where Jim James, chief of security, waited for them. They all clambered onto his golf cart and drove at once to the security trailer just behind the gate that led to the New York and San Francisco sets. James led them into his office, and all four sat down. "What do you want, Mr. McCandless?" asked James after the three men had settled into their chairs. "Of course, we will extend the FDEA every courtesy, but we have 30,000 people in the park today. We do not want any problems." "I understand, but there's already a problem. Someone's being held hostage here in this park, and as chief of security, you should know several Universal employees are involved in this kidnapping plot." You got to be kidding. You trying to tell me someone who works here is involved in a kidnapping? You're nuts. He leaned his chair back off the floor and snickered. "Mr. James," said Jack McCandless as he rose to his full 6'4", towering over James's desk, "are you ready to vouch for every one of the park's employees?" "Well, no." The chair settled back on the floor as James stopped snickering. "But this is a hell of a place to hide a kidnap victim." "Tell me where's a better place than in the middle of 30,000 people confined in an area like this?" "Yeah, okay, but where? We have security people all over this place, in uniform, plain clothes, even outsiders that we hire to watch the watchers. It'd be nuts, plain crazy." "Not so crazy. You know every one of your people by sight?" "Well, the security people? You bet your sweet ass I do, and by name." He felt more secure again, and the chair tipped back. "Well, how about the rest of the employees? How about today's new hires and employee guests? Don't be an ass, James. We are positive our quarry is here." "Okay," said James with resignation. "Tell me what you want. I'll do it." "Well, stay the hell out of the way for now. We don't want to attract any attention, and we don't need your help. Yet." "You got it. We're out of it. Let me warn you, though. We are packed today, and if you start shooting, we're going to have a hell of a mess. Capiche?" "Yeah, I understand. There is one more thing." McCandless let up on the tough cop act and went for friendly. "We may need to leave and return a few times. We don't want to be seen coming and going through the gates, and we don't want some badge showing us as visiting firemen." There's a construction gate. I'll show you where. Tell the guard that your code... Wait a minute." He went to his file cabinet, pulled a loose-leaf folder, and tracked down a page with his finger. "Tell the guard you're code 33. That'll gain you access to all the guard posts, but not through the main gates. Now, if you want to go through the main gates, use these," he said, handing them 3 passes. "They don't have to be shown to the attendant, so you don't have to wear a badge." "I appreciate your cooperation," said Jack. "Is there anything else?" "I don't think so, and not just yet," answered Bill. "Well, please," begged James, "don't start a panic." The 3 men went through the steel gate just behind Louis' Italian restaurant. This was the first time Clint had been in one of these theme parks. Jack was acting as guide because, as he said, "With 4 kids, you gotta live in these places. They have specials for Florida residents, so it's not as expensive as it is for the tourists." Most people were in shorts and short shorts. The macho guys wore the sagging armpit jumpers, trying to show off their pecs, and a few women were in outfits so tight they looked like olives stuffed in a jar. As they walked, searching for a face, looking and staring, Clint felt ill at ease. There was a bond between him and his brother. It wasn't as if they were identical twins that could feel each other's presence, but there was a bond. Clint knew that Jeff's life was valuable only so long as the dopers did not catch Clint. Once they had him, Jeff and Clint were both history. Clint, Jack, and Bill made a circuit around the perimeter of the park, starting where they had entered at the New York stage. They went on through San Francisco, past the Jaws exhibit in the Amityville area, and then crossed a bridge into a mixed bag that held the Back to the Future ride. "I'd like to come back and ride that thing," Clint thought. But first things first. They went past the Animal Act, and then the E.T. set. Not one familiar face. Every time they passed one of Jack's agents, they signaled, Open recognition was out of the question, so they couldn't go around like the park employees talking into radios. It was bad enough to be in baseball jackets, but these were needed to cover the heavy armament they were hauling. McCandless did have a radio, but it was only to be used for a positive ID. For now, they could rely on the implanted transmitter Clint carried under his skin. They strolled past the La Bamba restaurant and onto the Hollywood set. It was a shame not to enjoy it, as it was really a big magical playground. All the sets were used to film real movies, and twice they came across areas that were barricaded with signs calling for a hot set. The cameras and actors were oblivious to the tourists gaping at them and continued filming. The park was built around a man-made lake, so it wasn't long before they had circumnavigated the lot. At night, Universal has a daring stunt show on the lake with the bad guys chased by the good guys in high-speed boats. There's artificial gunfire, big bursts of flames, and explosions. As the three men walked past the dock area where the stunt people were setting up, Jack stopped, motioned to the others to continue walking, and he went over to take a closer look. "I made one of the men in our picture gallery. He was gassing one of the boats for tonight's stunt show," exclaimed Jack as he returned to Clint and Bill. "You sure?" asked Bill. "Yeah, I know him from a couple of scrapes we pulled him in on before. We had him on an interstate weapons charge. I could kick myself. I should have highlighted him from his pictures." "You couldn't know he was here?" "Yeah, but the face was familiar. I think we'd better find a place to sit for a couple of minutes while I really go over these shots. There could be more familiar faces, and it'd help if we knew who they were." They walked over to Louis' Italian restaurant, a little pizza place which sat on a corner, and had a good view of the passers-by. Clint secured a table near the window with a view in two directions. As Bill joined him, Clint said, "I'm getting more like Jeff every day. I'm hungry." "We were too. Jack's getting something to eat. I'm going to hit the head. It's just around the corner." "Pizza all right?" asked Jack as he came to the table. "Yeah, sure. I'll go get myself a Coke," answered Clint. Nodding, Jack stretched out his legs and studied the tourists. Clint returned after standing in line for 10 minutes. Bill was there, but no Jack. "Boy, the service on my line was a pain in the butt. All I wanted was a soda, and it took forever. Where's Jack?" "I thought he was still getting the food." "No, he came with that great big pizza, and I left to get a drink." "He wasn't here when I got here. Pizza was sitting there just like it is." "Well, he wouldn't have left to go to the can without waiting to tell us first." The two men looked at each other and froze. Jack had been taken, which meant they knew Clint was in the park. Well, there was one consolation. They were in the right place. But what to do now? Chapter 10. Bill returned from the phone. "I called Jack's office and brought them up to speed." "Those goons don't need Jack," mused Clint. "He's excess baggage. They'll kill him." "Well, I can't be sure, of course, but I don't think so. We're pushing them to the wall right now, so they have to shit or get off the pot. They want you. Your brother and Jack are the trade." "Yeah, with the promise that if I tell them what they want to know, I'll go free and unharmed." "Bull." "Let me think this thing through, Clint. They have Jeff, they have Jack, they want you." "Well, how do we get them to make the trade?" "No trade. If they set one up, they'd squeeze you and kill all three of you." "Well, not if we play it like the deal in Nam." Way too dangerous. We have a park full of people and no room to maneuver. We don't know where they are, but they sure as hell have us in full view. I bet they're watching us right now, waiting for us to make a move." Impatient, Clint snapped, "Okay, I understand all that. But remember the swap we played with the Gooks? We were in the middle of a rice paddy. They had no place to hide, we had no place to hide. Both sides had cover and fire well within range, so if anything went wrong, boom, everybody's dead." "So the only difference here is the people," said Clint. Bill agreed. "Exactly. Innocent people. Nah, there has to be another way." "What are you thinking about?" "Well, maybe the lake. We make the swap in the middle of the lake using the boats." "Oh, sure, that's fine. You're out there in one boat, they're in another. You get in their boat, they take off." "Well, they can't go very far." Bill shook his head. "No, that won't work. They have no getaway. We have to keep thinking. There's a way, Clint. Hang in there." Clint rose. "I'm going down to the dock and take a closer look at the equipment and talk to our friend there."
"Well, you can't do that," growled Bill.
"I'm done sparring. They have 2 people, one of which is my brother. I'm going to find out what kind of deal we can make. We'll go from there." Although Bill understood Clint's urgency, he tried to hold his friend back for safety. Clint glowered his frustration, and Bill backed off. Cautiously, Clint stepped down the ramp to the boathouse, where the stunt boats were still being gassed for the evening performance. He slowly pushed open the small gate labeled "Authorized Personnel Only." He could see his quarry hunched over a coil of rope, unaware of Clint's presence. At cobra speed, he grabbed the man Jack had recognized, holding him by the neck with such power that the man could not speak. "I'm going to let up on the pressure. If you say anything to the others or try to make a break, I'll snap your neck. You understand?" The man tried to move his head up and down, but couldn't. "I know you're trying to say yes, so here we go." As Clint eased up on the pressure of his fingers on the neck, the man started forward. Clint increased his grip. "You think I'm kidding?" "I'm not. That's my brother you scum have, and you mean nothing to me. Now I'll try one more time, but this is the last time. You understand?" The man assented as much as he could. Clint released slightly. The man did not move. "Now here is the message for those bags of shit you work for. You have Jeff and Jack, you want me. Even swap. I'll set the time and place, but first I have to have their agreement to the deal. I'm leaving now, going back over to Louis'. I'll sit at the same table. If you all agree to the deal, you come out on deck, take that pail, turn it over, and tip your hat in my direction. I'll get back to you to set it up. Do you understand everything I said?"
"Yes,"
came the garbled reply. Clint released his neck a little more.
"Oh, what if they say no?"
he croaked, rubbing his throat. "None of your business. The only signal is an okay by you. I'll handle everything else. You have 5 minutes. Clint returned to Louis and Bill Clark. "See? Easy as pie."
"Hey, I'm sitting 30 yards away and I saw that guy turn green with fear."
"It wasn't fear. I shut down an artery. If he hadn't answered in another 30 seconds, I probably would have killed him." Clint's face was a passive mask. Bill had worked with Clint long enough in Nam to know what this man was capable of. He was happy that Clint had lost none of his prowess. They would need every bit he had to get out of this mess. As they sat there, waiting for the signal, Bill jumped up.
"There she is!"
he yelled. People around him looked and then laughed. They thought he was some old codger ogling a young chick. "Who?" murmured Clint, pulling him back down.
"The girl Jeff was staying with. The one he spent the last 3 days with."
"Where?"
"Right there in front of the rail that leads from Richter's restaurant to the boat landing."
"Oh, yeah, I see her. She's not with anyone, and she looks as free as a bird."
"You think we have another Marguerite?"
asked Bill. "There's no one near her. No one guarding her that I can see. She must be with them."
"Yeah, it figures. If it were just a casual romance, they would have snuffed her out back at the house.
Or at least left her there to try to explain. No, she's part of them. Let's get her."
You stay. You watch for that jerk signal. I'll pick her up and bring her back here."
"She could be another bargaining chip," said Clint. He watched as Bill went out the side door of Louis', crossed the cobblestone walk that duplicates San Francisco's streets, and sidled up to the girl. She tried to resist, but Bill's grip on her arm was sufficient to keep her in tow. When Clint was sure Bill had her, he returned his gaze to the dock area, waiting for the signal. Clint felt more than heard Bill sit down with his guest.
"Clint, I want you to meet Jenny. Jenny, this is Jeff's brother."
She turned white. Bill continued.
"I forgot to tell her who I was and where I was taking her. I think she's a dip and thought she was being rousted."
By this time Jenny had regained some of her composure.
"You got no right to tell me what to do."
Her voice was as annoying as fingernails screeching across a blackboard. Clint leaned over the table and spoke in a low, menacing tone. "That is my brother those goons have. Now, if you don't want to die, right here, right now, you will answer my questions." The girl took one look at Clint and knew she was in mortal danger.
"Clint, there's our man."
They saw the man turn the bucket upside down. Then he turned toward the restaurant and with 2 fingers to his cap saluted. but there was a sneer on his face. Clint did not miss it. Chapter 11. "We have to figure out a better plan of attack," said Clint. "The big lake won't work." "Why does this have to go off on water?" asked Bill. "I think our best chance for survival is in the wet stuff, away from their fire, away from the tourists, and basically out of sight." "Why don't you just fall in that shark ride and let the son of a bitch eat you?" said Jenny. Clint was just going to clip her upside of the head when the light went on. The idea formulated quickly. Jaws is a water ride, and boisterous at the end. It would make an ideal place to pull off the rescue. The plan was simple. First, limit the number of goons that got on the Jaws ride. Jim James' people had to be the first aboard and act as park guides for the ride. Bill and Clint would go aboard as if they were being led to slaughter, but at the correct moment, all hell would break loose. Bill would create a diversion to get the tourists excited, but not overly scared. At that moment, Clint, Jeff, and Jack would hightail it over the rail, and McCandless's men sitting next to the creeps would stomp on them. The trio would swim underwater to the nearest landfall. The gang would be cuffed, with the guides telling everyone that it's all part of the ride. "Well, how about Jack?" asked Clint. "Can he swim?" "Give me a second." Bill went to a telephone just outside the restaurant. In 2 minutes he was back. "I didn't want to use radio just in case they have enough scanners to monitor the bands we're using. Jack's office tells me he was a SEAL in the Navy, so we're covered. The only problem I see is making sure our people are there, and that Jeff and Jack know what's coming down. One mistake, and they're both dead." "Jeff is no problem," said Clint. "I can signal him as to what I want. If Jack will follow his lead, we're all set." "Well, first things first. I think it's time we showed off our prize. Let's get this plan in action." "Bill, you think this'll work?" "Execution is what counts. This one's no different. You've come up with a winner, Clint. Now I can go back to Miami." Clint stared at Bill in amazement until he realized Bill was scared too. The men each took Jenny under an arm and went outside. They walked toward the gangway, where suddenly they spotted a stir on the dock. A large, brawny man, one they had not seen before, came into the open from inside the shed. He looked their way and returned to the shack on the dock. "He's a new player, but they've spotted their little friend." Just as Bill was speaking, one of the feds came up and stopped. He pretended he was watching the dock area and said, "We just picked up a transmission on one of their bands. They're pissed that we got someone called Jenny." He eyed the girl. "Good," said Bill. "That may force the play our way." Just as he said it, Jenny's weight sagged onto their grip. The girl's eyes stared blankly. As Clint put his arm around her for additional support, he felt the blood oozing from her back. The opposition had eliminated a potential problem. The two men walked Jenny over to the gate as if supporting an ill person and brought her to security. Jim James almost choked when they brought the dead girl in and sat her body in a chair. "One of the misfortunes of war," said Bill. "Okay, Mr. James, this is what we need from you, and we need it now." They huddled over the security chief's desk, laying out their plan and assuring him of its success. When they were finished, they turned and headed for the door. "Oh, by the way, Chief, don't worry. There was no excitement over this little murder in the park, just another fainting tourist," finished Clint as they left the security trailer. James dropped his head on the desk and moaned, "Why did I leave Disney?" Bill and Clint strolled to the Jaws ride, waited in line for the 20 minutes or so until they spotted James and a couple of men taking over one of the large open pontoon boats that seat about 50 people in rows. The boat left the dock, started its journey with the guide rattling off her spiel. The ride ended with a monstrous shark speeding towards and almost jumping into the boat to eat all the tourists. The ride was exciting, and Clint smiled. He had learned in his psych classes that you could divert attention with excitement. The carnival hucksters did it all the time with the shell game, and the illusionists pulled off their greatest stunts by making people look where the magician wanted them to, not where the real action was. The plan, as he had laid it out to Bill, would work. They sent out a coded signal for 4 of their own people to come to Louis'. With just 9 people in on the plan, Clint felt good about its success. "Timing is the key," Clint urged when they met with the others. We have about 2 seconds to pull off the final act. If we miss our cues, we'll have 2 dead people on our hands, and one of them is my brother. It had better go off right." The vehement look on his face told the assemblage everything. He gave them their final assignment, the coded hand signals they would receive, and the exact timing of the play. He finished, set his jaw, and said, "Are there any questions?" Not a hand was raised. They knew they had better be right, the first and only time. They headed back to the dock area, but with a different stride. They were intent on the coming confrontation, each deep in his own thoughts. But to those they passed, they looked as if they hadn't a care in the world. Inside his head, Clint was seething with anger. The pounding in his temples was from adrenaline flowing. Every spurt fueled his anger. He was fuming over the fact that these bastards could get away with the crap they were pulling. His anger extended to the dope they were pushing. They're killing people without regard for human life, and the fact that the law agencies were almost powerless to stop them. He was glad to be a part of this operation to clean out a few of these bastards. But his worry for his brother was foremost in his mind. He did not dare to think of failure. They returned and waited at the head of the gangway where the stunt boats were serviced. Their first contact started up the walk. Clint shook his head, no. The man returned to the shack, and there was a momentary pause. Finally, the large man they had seen before came out and walked up the gangway. He stopped about 5 feet away. "Would you like the entire world to be in on this?" questioned Clint. The man came closer, much closer. Clint sized him up. He was at least 6'5", probably in the 240-pound range, and although it was a warm day, he wore a full-length Old West-style riding duster. Clint's eyes picked up the form of a gun, long and straight under his coat. Good, thought Clint. He won't be as mobile with that shotgun under there. The man was brief. "You want your brother and the narc. We want you. Even swap." "No problem," answered Clint. "Come with me, then. When we're in the shack, I'll radio for their release." Clint laughed out loud, as if the man had told him a very funny joke. "You must think I'm a first-class idiot." "No, not first class. But you're a bigger fool if you think we'll hand your brother and the narc over on your word that you'll come with us." "Why, sweetheart, I never thought any such thing," answered Clint. "Let us pick a spot where we are all safe. Then the swap will be made, and they will walk out free." "And where is this ideal place of exchange?" questioned the man. "I want a place where 100 of your goons can't swoop down and pick another prisoner, or worse." "How about right here?" "Oh, yeah, right in your parlor. Just like that little old spider the fly. No way, Jose." The man's face snapped alert. Clint thought quickly. "Oh, I was making a joke, but I think I nailed his name. Not that it will do... Wait a minute." Aloud he said, "Listen, Jose, I think..." "How do you know my name?" "Our man spotted you quite a while back. Picking you out of the files was no problem." The man stared at Clint. Jose opened the coat slightly to reveal a shotgun. "You will tell us everything we want to know once we have you." "Oh, you really make me nervous. Big bad you is going to hurt little old me. Dear, dear. Listen, Jose, the pile of information I have on you would be too heavy to carry. Let's cut out the shit and get down to the swap. I'll take my chances with you any time." They finally agreed upon Clint's plan, as he had intended all along, so Clint wandered back up to Bill. Bill sputtered, "Have you gone nuts? You got that jerk so mad at you he'll skin you alive, literally, when he gets what he wants out of you." "That's what I wanted, Bill. Him really pissed. It clouded his judgment. How many people do you think he can smuggle aboard that boat?" Jim James and 4 of his people were still plying the Jaws boat, ready to board the feds before Jose and his gang came to the ride with Jeff and Jack. Along the way to Jaws, they looked at the game of chance, got a Coke, watched people having their pictures taken by the huge shark photo op, just waiting until Jose started his trek. Apprehensive of potential double-cross, Clint was positive Jose had sent his people on the boat, and he had missed him, when he suddenly spotted the gang. Behind Jose and the dock worker came another dark-skinned man who held a duffel bag at Jeff's back. Next in line was Jack, with another man who obviously had a jacket hiding a gun that was aimed at Jack. Surveying the crowd moving toward Jaws, Clint spotted 2 characters walking in front, 2 behind. Counting Jose, they had 7 that were showing. Clint and Bill swung in next to Jeff, and with a friendly wave, Clint leaned around the bodyguard and called, "You okay, Jeff? Uncle Fudd taking good care of you?" "Bunged up a little, but ambulatory." The man with the duffel bag pushed Jeff ahead. As they separated, Clint called out, "Remember San Diego?" Once on a trip to San Diego, they had been surfing when the undertow had taken hold. Both he and Jeff nearly drowned. It was only their amazing ability to hold their breaths under water that saved them. Puzzled briefly, Jeff looked back at Clint, then remembered, and winked. It was all set. They came to the ride, entered the line. The dopers were pretty much bunched together, but the hostages and their guards were separated from the rest of the group by tourists who resented anyone encroaching on their hard-fought-for turf in line. Jim James and his men pulled Clint and Bill onto the boat and grabbed 4 other tourists. Then they passed only Jeff, Jack, and 2 of their guards onto the boat, separating them from Jose. The boat pulled away from the dock. The guide went through his normal spiel leading up to the shark attack. On cue, Bill jumped up as if terrified and began screaming, "I'm afraid the shark will eat me! I'm afraid the shark will eat me!" The suddenness of his movement and Bill's scream made everyone look his way. Clint reached over, chopped the neck of the man guarding Jeff, and broke his spinal column. Then Clint, Jeff, and Jack were over the side before any of Jose's thugs could react. Bill sat back, hand inside his coat, tightly clutching his revolver. Meanwhile, the tourists were in a frenzy, screaming, "Man overboard! Help! Get a life preserver!" The security guards, dressed as ride attendants, were trying to get everyone into a seat, assuring them that this was just part of the great Jaws adventure. Gradually, the guides restored order, and the tourists sat down, muttering threats of lawsuit and disgruntled comments. During the melee, the other 2 agents placed themselves next to the thugs, keeping them in line. When the boat returned to the dock, public relations people were there with free passes and promises of discounts at the restaurants. No one noticed the agents leading the bad guys away in handcuffs, and no one noticed, except Bill, that there was no Clint, Jeff, or Jack. The next day at federal headquarters in downtown Orlando, instead of Jose squeezing Clint for information, the federal men were having their conversation with Jose. In 9 other offices in the building, thugs were being questioned separately. The amount of information logged that day helped stem the tide of dope entering the country. The 4 key players were sitting in Jack's office. "I didn't know I could hold my breath that long," McCandless grinned. "Good thing I give up smoking." "Hey, Jack, you would never have made it if I didn't hold my hand over your mouth and squeeze your nose," said Jeff. "And you, oh older brother, I thought you were going to explode. There we were, standing, or trying to stand, with our heads underwater so no one could see us, and my brother Clint almost blew the whole thing by exploding." "Bullshit, I can outswim you and hold my breath longer than you any day." "Gentlemen, y'all were magnificent," Bill said. He rose to shake the hands of the 2 truckers. "You'll find your trucks parked outside, and inside each of them is a grateful remembrance from your country." The 2 brothers looked at each other. "Money?" 2 tickets to Universal, 2 more to Disney World," Bill laughed. "Hey, it's better than a medal." The 4 men looked at each other and smiled. Then Clint and Jeff left to hit the road. It had been a long haul. You've been listening to Murder in the Sunshine State by Tom MacLeod, read by Bernard Bridges. For additional titles in this series or information on our other available audiobooks, call toll-free 1-800-887-7692. We hope you've been pleased with this presentation, and thank you for being a listener of Spellbinders.
For your future listening pleasure, the following excerpt is from The Day the Cowboys Quit by Elmer Kelton. If you enjoy this introduction to The Day the Cowboys Quit, please check with your local bookseller or call Spellbinders toll-free at 1-800-887-7692. Thank you.
Chapter 1. In later years, people often asked Hugh Hitchcock about the Canadian River Cowboys strike of 1883. If they were strangers, he looked them over carefully before he answered, and sometimes he did not answer at all. He figured there was no way of explaining to anyone who did not understand the old-time cowboy. Those days, Hitch always said, a man proved himself with horsemanship. A rider a cut above average was looked up to, even by the sourest wagon cook. Next to his way with a horse, a cowboy was proudest of his independence. He worked for other men, but they owned nothing of him, except his time. He was a free soul. Money did not rule him. The Canadian River region of Texas then was less than 10 years settled. The sandy-bottomed river cutting a deep, rough gash across the heart of that uplifted tableland known to the Spanish as Llano Escatado, the Staked Plains. It was a grand plateau, a vast, treeless ocean of grass, often flat to the eye, but gently rolling. A decade before, the prairie had teemed with grazing buffalo, fleet white-rumped antelope, and roving packs of gray wolves which lived among them, pulling down the halt and the lame. Across this unmapped, sunny land had roamed the Comanche and the Kiowa, brothers to the wolf. They had known its hidden watering places, its changing seasons, its hunger, its bounty, its angry storms, and its quiet peace. Now most of the plains grass was claimed by right of occupancy, and already the more observant cowboys could see that it grew less tall. Dust stirred easier now, a sign of overgrazing. Already men, in their eagerness for gain, foreshadowed their own defeat by demanding more from the land than it could produce. And those in a position to hire demanded more of other men. Hugh Hitchcock always said cowboy independence triggered the cowboy strike. There came a time that some men decided independence was too costly when the wrong people had it. And when you crowd a man too far, he may do something in self-defense that is not sensible either. Old cowboys in later years argued no end over the causes of the strike and the starting of it. To each it began in a different place and a different way. To Hugh Hitchcock, looking back, it started the day Rascal McGinty and the Figure 4 rep went to their guns over ownership of a roan cow. He always remembered the kind of day it was. The sun bright over the gentle roll of the open plains, the sky blue as a pretty woman's eyes. He remembered Rascal McGinty and that red face of his and red hair, and a temper to match them both. Rascal was riding Sweetheart, an ill-named Mustang bay, an honest horse that would work his heart out, but only after he had done his damnedest to bust the rider first. Hitch always recalled that Dayton Brumley was riding a Figure 4 sorrel called Blaze for the crooked streak that ran from forelock down to a snip nose. She wasn't much of a cow, and the scrubby calf punching its long nose at her near-dry udder showed she had been less than choosy in the bull she associated with. But to a syndicate outfit like the Figure 4, every calf branded meant dollars of capital. To a wage-earning cowboy like Rascal McGinty or his brother Law, trying to build a shirt-tail herd for themselves, Even a crippled cow or a blind one was of value, so long as she could yet conceive and deliver. When Dayton Brumley rode into the stray herd and called the cow's brand a figure 4, Rascal stood up in his stirrups. "Hell, you say that cow's an LR, sure as ever was." Hugh Hitchcock heard, and the voice was a warning flag. Hitch was wagon boss on the W's River Division, and the McGinty brothers worked under him. He knew Rascal's emotions lay always near the surface, the volatile cowboy, quick to laugh or quick to explode. A cowboy came spurring. "Hitch, you better get over yonder. There's apt to be trouble." Instinctively, they always looked to Hugh Hitchcock. That was why he was wagon boss. Dayton Brumley ignored Rascal and again called the pair as property of the figure 4. On open range, before barbed wire cut all of Texas into pastures, cattle of many brands mixed together. Boundary lines were an invisible thing. At roundup time, the big ranches sent their chuck wagons and teams of men to the various divisions, and they sent cowboy representatives to neighboring outfits' wagons, each to watch out for the interests of the brand that paid him. The calves were branded according to the marks of ownership on their mothers, and when a calf became weaned and still had no brand, it was, by custom, considered a maverick, belonging to the man on whose range it was found. In practice, it more often belonged to the man whose loop caught it first. One purpose of the roundup, then, was to leave as few mavericks as possible for the quick loop men. Identification of the cow was usually easy, for a cowboy who couldn't read his own name soon learned the brands of the ranches around him. But sometimes a brand healed poorly or haired over heavily. That was a time for negotiation, and failing agreement, it was a time when someone must arbitrarily play the role of judge and declare ownership. "Go slow, Rascal," Hitch said quietly as he pushed his gray horse between the two men. A young W rider named Joe Sands had a rope around the calf's neck and was waiting for Hitchcock's judgment. Hitch's natural inclination was to accept Rascal's word because they had been friends so long. But he knew that was not the right and proper way. "Let's have a look at her," he said. He leaned from the saddle for a close look at the brand. "Somebody done a bad job with the iron. The way it's haired over, she could be either one or neither one. I've been telling you, Rascal, your LR brand is too much like the figure 4. "Tell them," Rascal grinned. "Me and Law, we had our brand first. Let the figure 4 change theirs." The thought pleased him because the figure 4 outfit was reputed to own 40 or 50,000 head. Dayton Brumley said, "I'll call her figure 4. Another cowboy trotted up on a nervous-eyed dun. Law McGinty, 4 or 5 years younger than Rascal, demanded, "What is it, Rascal? That rich damn Yankee outfit trying to steal our cow?" Rascal made a placating gesture to his brother. "Don't bust your cinch, Button. Hitch is fixing to set things straight." Hitch had an uncomfortable feeling Rascal was taking advantage of friendship, putting Hitch in a position where he must stand up for a preconceived judgment. He said, "We'll stretch her and take a good look." They laid her down helpless on the ground, and Hitch dismounted. He purposely put Law on the heels because that obligated the cowboy to stay in his saddle and out of trouble. On his knees, Hitch carefully ran his fingers over the brand, trying to feel through the hair any scar that didn't show. He shook his head. "Still can't tell." Rascal stepped from his saddle, fishing in his shirt pocket. "I said I know that old cow, and I'll prove it." He brought out a pair of tweezers and began plucking hair. Hitch came near smiling, despite the potential seriousness of the matter. Probably not another man on the roundup was so certain of argument that he would carry tweezers. Though Rascal was a W. cowhand, he was also an owner of sorts whose nature called for him to protect his interest. It bothered Hitch, assuming responsibility for a dispute like this. He and Rascal and La McGinty had known each other before they had come to the Panhandle. They had helped Charlie Wade bring his W herd up here from cattle-poor South Texas brush country in the 70s.